I'm Bill Woods. Welcome to round 10, Formula One World Championship. Magny-Cours, French Grand Prix, second round in as many weeks. It's an exciting World Championship this year, delicately poised after the previous round at the Nürburgring, where things, Neil Crompton, could have been a lot worse for Kimi Raikkonen and a lot better for Michael Schumacher.
Well, it's really, I guess, a hallmark of the way in which this series has unfolded this year, Billy. It's really, really tight, and all the talk this weekend is all about tyres, and that's probably going to be the determining factor for this race and certainly for the races in the foreseeable future. Tyres, tyres, tyres. You'll hear a lot about that tonight.
And the answer to that question is not as simple as it might have sounded after qualifying. More on that later. But first, the championship points after the round in Germany, but it was the European Grand Prix.
And it's still pretty tight at the top with just 7 points between Michael Schumacher and Kimi Raikkonen. Ralph up into third place with 43. His teammate Montoya with 39, sharing that figure with Spaniard Fernando Alonso. Rubens Barrichello with 37 points, then David Coulthard with 25 and Jarno Trulli with 13. And in the Constructors' Championship, it is a reasonable margin now in favour of Ferrari, but still not an awful lot. 95 plays 82. Then we've got McLaren, Mercedes in third position, Renault, BAR, Honda, Jordan, Ford, Sauber and Jaguar. But what about the form for Williams vaulting up? I mean, early in the year, we talked about this early today on RPM, we heard people like Ralph saying, for example, that he just didn't think they were going to be competitive with the FW25 and that the season may be a whitewash. Well, they're well in the game now. That car's performing beautifully. They've tested well in recent weeks and they're racing brilliantly. Well,
the inconsistencies, of course, that have been derived from the new structure of qualifying, the new point system, have given Williams that opportunity to make up the ground, even though they were quite poor early in the championship. Looking back at Nürburgring, certainly one of their best results so far as we look at the highlights.
And like all of the races so far this year, Billy, it was a real nail-biter. I thought a great pressure motor race with some fine moments in it. Mark Webber qualified 11th, and we actually had a pretty calm start to this event. That was about the only time we saw Mark Webber throughout the evening. It was very poor television coverage of his efforts. Jacques Villeneuve had a spin after passing the Minardis and had to work his way back again. Raikkonen had it all locked up. The thing was on fire in terms of pace, but then unfortunately lost a Benz engine. The left bank letting go there in a big way, leaving Ralph totally in control. But this was a fascinating brawl between Michael and Juan Pablo Montoya. And unusually, it was Michael Schumacher, the world champion, that came unglued. The car was beached in the gravel. He got some assistance to get underway. He wasn't pinged for it, and Ralph went on for his first win in the 2003 championship and showing that terrific form. Also, of course, a significant win for Michelin. Now, this little table here tells an interesting story, folks. We've had 6 different winners after 9 rounds of racing prior to this event. Michael's got 4 wins and 4 poles. Ralph has got a win, obviously, with a couple of pole positions. His teammate also has a win. Kimi Raikkonen has led the most number of races. He's actually picked up 7 most led races scores, if you can actually have that. And then Kimi and Michael have had the fastest laps by 3. Looking down at the tyre battle, it's 4 poles and 4 wins for Michelin and 5 poles and 5 wins for Bridgestone. That excludes qualifying for tonight's Grand Prix. So that tells you a little bit about just how intense it is at the top. It's fascinating when you look at Kimi's performances, how he's not been able to convert to wins, but of course he has been very, very consistent. But for an accident and that engine letting go, he's been there pretty well all along.
It's kind of interesting because this is the circuit where last year Michael Schumacher clinched the championship, and Kimi Raikkonen had yet another of those stories where he almost took maximum points but didn't. Eventually he got his first championship race win this year. But now as we look at the circuit, changes once again, as we saw at the Nürburgring, slight changes to this circuit too, Neil.
It's about 150 metres longer than it was this time last year. 16 corners, nearly 4.5 k's around. Top speed here is just on 300 k's. The average speed's about 210. It's an ultra smooth surface, and a little bit like, for example, Queensland Raceway or, for example, Eastern Creek. It's got a personality that varies with the weather conditions. And speaking of weather, it's currently 23 there. We were just on the line to Magny-Cours just prior to the start of our telecast. It is very humid. It's partly cloudy. It's expected to get quite a bit warmer. In fact, Mark Webber's suggesting that he thinks there'll be track temperatures in the order of 40-odd degrees later as the race unfolds.
Now, arriving here this weekend, we've had some really unusual stories, but let's start with BAR. Quite extraordinary what happened to them when they arrived at the pits.
Well, this is a soap opera. David Richards, the team principal there from BAR Honda, turns up for work along with all the lads to work on the cars, and they've been impounded. Remember that little kerfuffle that happened at Monaco a few weeks ago, where a fellow by the name of France Corbet, who's a Canadian television producer, claims that he wasn't paid his sales commission on a deal. Remember a few years ago when Craig Pollock was running the team, they had little Teleglobe stickers on the car. Well, that money apparently didn't find its way to the originator, and he's suing them. Anyway, the bottom line was that it went to court on Friday. It was thrown out of court, and I think there's now going to be damages action going the other way. The cars were released. The drivers got to do one out lap, one flying lap, and obviously an in lap, which is quite extraordinary to have so much equipment, so much money tied up, and have such little track time, then compounding the drama. Jensen's gone out on Saturday in practice and lost an engine, so he's barely done any laps at all. Quite amazing.
He's pretty happy under the circumstances, if that's possible, but I think you know what I mean. Relative to what happened to him, he's not so badly off. Now, Mark Webber had a little collision with Michael Schumacher, and there's a lot more to this than meets the eye, Neil Crompton.
Car controller releases the Ferrari straight into the path of Mark Webber, so the world champion exits. He wouldn't have been able to see him outside his peripheral vision with the helmet on. Here's another view of it here. Michael launches out and whack, rips the front wing right off the Jaguar. Mark was absolutely unimpressed about this, and Ferrari actually copped a $10,000 fine for their trouble, and you can see Webber voicing his displeasure, muttering under that helmet, because they were in fact actually about to test to change the front wing, so when you don't have it on there you can't do that.
But you did say on RPM that Webber's attitude to the whole thing impressed you, that he didn't just take it lying down as some of the minnows might tend to do.
Well, he's establishing himself now as a serious contender in the game. It was his best result last weekend with a 6th place. He wasn't ultimately happy with the car, but he's performing well. He's not looking like a guy that's sitting there saying, oh, gee, I'm lucky to be in Formula One. He's looking like an established bloke. He's been position 1 on a couple of occasions in practice sessions this year, including on Friday in the wet at Magny-Cours. And he was in front by quite a significant margin. It wasn't just a small couple of tenths here and there. He actually had quite a margin on his side. It was variable weather conditions, but it's been an impressive performance from him mentally. He's got a terrific approach to it.
Now, another minnow who stood up and was counted on Friday was Jos Verstappen. The weather was on his side.
Look at this.
Look at Minardi.
They went berserk, folks. On Friday, again in variable weather conditions, they were actually P1. And actually P2 as well. Justin Wilson was disqualified ultimately for being 2.5 kilos under the weight limit because of the variance between the dry weather and wet weather tyres in their ultimate weight. And they lost position 2 for his teammate. But Jos, the boss, was the top man. But of course they came back down to earth with a thud come Saturday.
Well, that's of course when the quick cars had to run first because of the unusual Friday circumstances. Let's see how they went. Justin Wilson was the exception. He was disqualified on Friday for a weight penalty. Then he broke his primary car in Saturday practice, so he went first in his spare and set a time that would ultimately be nearly a second slower than everyone else. Then the big names started to roll out of pit lane. Jenson Button second up and chasing setup after problems with both cars in practice. He lost time on one corner with understeer but feels good about the car. Alonso chose a harder compound Michelin to combat some chronic understeer, and it worked, leaving him 7th overall. Next up, Ralf Schumacher, who'd not only won the previous round but turned 28 the day after. This was the drive of someone who was feeling very good.
And this is looking very promising indeed for Ralf Schumacher.
Ralf had also complained of understeer in some sections, but he needn't have worried. One of his few serious challenges was next on the track. Kimi Raikkonen, like Alonso, was running on hard Michelins, and he trailed Ralf on every sector.
This is going to be his fastest lap of the weekend, providing he doesn't make any mistakes.
A time good enough for row 2 when the dust had settled. For a change, Jarno Trulli out-qualified his teammate, good enough for 6th at the end of the session, and he was happy with that because he was struggling for setup in the morning. Only 2 of the remaining 14 drivers were given a chance of beating Ralph's time, and his teammate was one of them.
It's going to be very, very tight between the 2 teammates here.
It would be another Williams front row. Montoya pleased because earlier in the day he was 7/10ths slower than Ralf. David Coulthard was out to make sure he'd have no ugly chase from well down the grid like last weekend. He lifted his McLaren to a time that would be 5th fastest overall and ahead of Renault for a change. Fisichella floundered 3 seconds off the pace.
Then Michael Schumacher, the only Bridgestone driver considered capable of upsetting the Williams pair.
Michael giving it everything he's got.
He's not where he expected to be before the weekend, but given 6 of the top 7 cars were on Michelin, Michael's lap was exceptional. Rubens Barrichello emphasised that, his time good enough for only 8th. Predictably, remaining drivers fell down the order, but once again Mark Webber was tough, dropping only 2 spots to 9th.
But Webber looking good.
He felt there was a little more time in the car, but he's confident in his race package, especially his tyres. The rest of the lineup dropped like stones down the order as expected. Final man out, Jos Verstappen, summed it up best when he said, "It's back to reality today." Recapping the rows, Michael's talking about dicing with Montoya again, and of course, so are we. Barrichello has a Renault barrier to overcome. That can be frustrating, just ask Coulthard. Webber heads row 5, and the team is gaining confidence in this car's reliability. Sauber wanted to beat BAR and were hoping for more from their tyres. The final 4 is predictable. Jordan complaining of lack of grip at this circuit. And as for Paul Stoddart, well, he's still talking about Friday.
Really done.
Well, here we go on the grid. Of course, Bridgestone will test with 4 of its 5 teams during the week at Catalunya. Ferrari, Sauber, BAR and Jordan will be there. And you never know. They do say that even though they are out-qualified, they are pretty confident their tyre will stand up quite well consistently over the race pace.
Yes, and I said at the top of the show that tyres is going to be the chat tonight, and we'll certainly see that unfold. The suggestion is that because of a graining problem for the Bridgestones, that Michael's gone for a slightly harder tyre, and that's King hit his qualifying performance, but watch out for him in terms of consistent race performance. And watch also the front left tyre on the Michelin shod cars, and between laps 3 and 8, I understand that you need to pay careful attention to the Michelin guys as well, because graining is the issue. Many of the Michelin runners will in fact leave the fronts on. I can also tell you, Billy, that the majority of key runners are probably likely to 3-stop this race. Our own Mark Webber is going to be battling back there with Olivier Panis, so we'll watch his progress with interest as the night unfolds.
Ralph and Juan's 5th front row together. Webber's 5th top 10 qualification of the season. Excuse me. And just a couple of interesting things. Ralph has in fact out-qualified Juan Montoya 7-3 now. Rubens 9-1. He's been out-qualified by Michael, and Panis 9-1 over D'Amata.
Just talking about Ralph there. He was dominant in all 3 of the dry Saturday sessions following that topsy-turvy session on Friday. Quickest in Saturday morning practice, fastest man in the warm-up, and then obviously the fastest man in qualifying as well.
Jean Todt said, interestingly, that last weekend's Euro GP was the worst of the season so far for Ferrari. Even though they've had tougher races, they simply weren't in a position to compete, and he did not like that at all. He said he would not blame Bridgestone, though.
Track temperature is 30 degrees, air temperature 25, 36.
Both the Williams drivers expected to bolt in the early laps. When you look at the margins they've got, Bill, over their nearest rivals after qualifying, it's quite substantial. In fact, looking down through the grid, there's probably more spacing across this grid than we've seen at any other stage throughout the 2003 season. Incidentally, while I think of it, at this circuit at Magny-Cours, Mark Skaife actually raced here in Formula 3000 back in, I think it was about 1991. Mark Webber's had success here at this track. He was the winner in the Formula 3000 race in 2001, which was the same year that Ralph had his first pole position at this track.
Do not underestimate Michael Schumacher here, even though he's on Bridgestone. Ross Brawn made a comment saying that Michael really was underappreciated after his drive in Montreal, because they did have a serious problem there with preserving their brakes, but he backed off just enough to maintain the life of his brakes when it looked like they weren't going to last many more laps. So yet another example that we don't often hear too much about, and that is driver input.
This last section here is where the track has altered, including the entry to the pit lane there. And really probably fairly average. Oh, Michael actually locks up the front right as he just cycles up and warms up here. Overtaking opportunity into the Adelaide hairpin. Everywhere else pretty tight around this track, and I understand that Justin Wilson will start from pit lane. We're just about ready to cross to Magny-Cours and join ITV's Martin Brundle and James Allen as the cars trickle through the final complex. Pretty awkward Mickey Mouse, a little bit of track there. We're just about ready to go across now.
Big crowd here. You can see the balconies are full of people. The grandstands are full of people. They're all ready, and we're all ready too. The lights are going on. Any moment now, we'll be rocking and rolling at Magny-Cours. Here we go. Away they go! The two Williamses from the front. Look at the fast-starting Renault. Not a great start from Montoya from the dirty side of the track. He's being attacked by the McLaren. But where's Schumacher gone? Down to 5th place. He's battling hard with David Coulthard as the two BMW Williams go out at the front. And that was not the start Michael Schumacher wanted. Out onto the back straight, he is in 4th place.
Yes, and Coulthard unable to make the pass stick on Michael Schumacher. He's now under pressure from a Renault around the outside. He takes the inside line and gets away with it. Up at the front, though, Ralf Schumacher and Montoya, they're all cleanly through the Adelaide hairpin. Ralf Schumacher with a comfortable advantage then at the moment, not under pressure from anybody. Schumi just hanging on to that 4th place, and likewise Coulthard the 5th. So the winner there then was Kimi Räikkönen.
And also Jarno Trulli up into 5th place. That was the Renault you saw racing with David Coulthard. Alonso looks like he's got past both Barrichello and Coulthard up into 6th place. He was 8th at the end of the 1st sector, so he's had a tremendous 2nd sector, Fernando Alonso. We ride on board, though, with the Ferrari cutting to the head of the field. Ralf Schumacher leading, Montoya 2nd, Räikkönen 3rd, Michael Schumacher 4th, 5th is Trulli, 6th, I believe, is Alonso, 7th, Coulthard, 8th, Barrichello. Let's see as they come across the line. What's Alonso doing?
Yes, it's Coulthard up in 5th. I think the...
Whoa, Barrichello spun right outside my window, just underneath me from, where was he, 8th position, and that's not at all what Rubens Barrichello had in mind. He must have lost it over the chicane.
Yeah, he must have hit the curbs too hard. It hasn't shown up on TV yet, but as you say, James, literally could nearly reach out and touch him here. Barrichello having to wait until the entire field had passed before he could begin to spin the car around and carry on, and he will be at the back now. Ralf Schumacher then had a 1.2 second. Here we're going to see it now, and it just hitting the inside curb, I'd imagine. We can't see it in that shot, but collecting the inside curb, and there he is doing a 180 to head down the pit straight in the right direction, plumb last.
Just tidying up what we were saying about the order then between the McLaren and the two Renaults. David Coulthard has managed to get ahead of Jarno Trulli. He's in 5th place. Trulli is 6th and Alonso 7th. Barrichello was 8th. He's dropped down. So in the final points-paying position at the moment is Mark Webber in the Jaguar, who has been looking very strong all weekend. His teammate Antonio Pizzonia is right behind him in 9th place. Olivier Panis is in 10th, and then Villeneuve and Button, the two BAR cars, not enjoying the best of luck this weekend. A lot of stuff going on away from the circuit as well as on it, and they really haven't been particularly competitive.
Ralf Schumacher then 7/10ths faster than anybody else on the previous lap, building the lead to 1.9. Now remember, when he pulled away in Monaco, he'd pumped his tyres up a little bit higher than anybody else to give himself instant early grip. I'm saying he's necessarily done that this afternoon because he has been pretty mighty around here, hasn't he, through free practice and qualifying. But it gave him a car that was right on it at the beginning, and after 5-6 laps, Montoya started to just haul him back in again, so we'll watch out for that. But at the moment, Ralf Schumacher in a class of 1 in the 1:16s.
Indeed he is, and he's a second faster there on lap 2 than his brother Michael in the Ferrari, who is down in 4th place and now a full 4 seconds behind the younger Schumacher. So Michael not able to do anything off the start line. The strategy didn't work out for him, and he must just be hoping now that he can keep the pace up and see what happens with the Williams in front of him.
Barrichello did drop to last, even behind Wilson, who started from the pit lane. Although Barrichello now having done the fastest first sector, he'll be on a charge. Here's a replay of the start. Watch the two blue Renaults, and it's Michael Schumacher that was initially, I think, quite fast away. It seems as if it was the second gear phase of the start. He got away fine, and all of a sudden he appeared to be slowing slightly, or certainly not accelerating at the same rate. Two McLarens way wide on the outside, and it's then Schumacher and Coulthard side by side, a Renault recovering back onto the racetrack. Here we go, let's see where it went wrong. Yeah, I just think it was a difficult change into second. That puts Coulthard on the outside of him. Michael's got the initial racing line, and he's still got the McLaren bobbing around on the inside, and Coulthard not able to punish him for that one. Couldn't get on the power early enough to do anything about it, and Michael resuming in 4th place. Now it's Michael Schumacher who's done the fastest first sector as he closes the gap down to less than a second to 3rd place man Kimi Raikkonen. You're on board with 2nd place man Montoya.
Williams chasing their 2nd 1-2 finish in a row. They did it last weekend at the Nürburgring, and after a string of fantastic points results through May and June, they are now serious contenders for the Constructors' Championship. And in fact, if it finished as it is at the moment, with Michael Schumacher in 4th place, they would have closed the gap down to equal points. But obviously, with Ferrari having had more wins, then it would be a tie with Ferrari just in front. So a long way to go in this Grand Prix. This is lap 5 of 70. Ralf Schumacher leading, 3.3 seconds the margin from Montoya. Raikkonen 3rd, 5 seconds behind the race leader. Michael Schumacher still maintaining about a half a second a lap slower pace than the Williams at the front. You're looking here at the 2 Renaults. They're 6th and 7th behind the McLaren of Coulthard. Alonso 8 seconds behind the race leader now. Looking back here from Jarno Trulli's car. And then Webber still 8th, Pitsonia 9th, and Panis still in 10th place. And you're right, Martin, it does seem at the moment that the Renaults don't quite have the same sort of pace as the Williams at the front. They're not far off, 3 or 4 tenths of a second, but certainly matching the kind of speed we're seeing from the McLaren. So really the question mark is how much fuel are the McLarens carrying? When will they make their stop? This is lap 5.
Yes, truly looking the slightly racier of the 2 Renaults. It's still Ralf Schumacher in the 16s, everybody else well into the 1:17s. As you said, James, his lead was already 3.3. Let's have a look as they go over the line. It's up to 3.5. So he still is quicker than anybody else, but by much less of a margin. Is this the stage where Montoya starts getting into his comfort zone with his car and pegging that lead back? Raikkonen holding station. Michael Schumacher also within a second of Raikkonen, but getting no closer.
Well, Montoya has just set his fastest lap of the race so far, so he's starting to get on with it a little bit. So too Kimi Raikkonen. He's been fastest of anybody so far in this race in Sector 1, so he doesn't want to let Ralf Schumacher get away either. And very much nip and tuck in a really high pace, really fast pace at the front of this Grand Prix at the moment.
Well, of course, we know it's very easy in the pits there now under the new layout. Remember last year where they kept tripping over that very long white line and getting penalised on the exit of the pits? Something we need to watch out for this afternoon, especially if they're going to risk that 3 times. And where they were getting caught out last year was looking in their mirrors. They were really racing somebody hard to see where they were in Estoril before they cut across onto the racing line and cutting the white line. They couldn't really see it just at the last moment. So we'll keep a very close eye on that as Coulthard appears to be getting ever closer to Michael Schumacher, who is 4th, and the 2 Renaults are hauling the pair of them in.
Indeed they are. Quick check on the Brits. David Coulthard, as we know, is in 5th place. We've got Jenson Button, he's 12th at the moment in the BAR. Ralph Furman is last at the moment. Didn't see what happened to him, but he's dropped behind Justin Wilson and Giancarlo Fisichella, who are having a scrap for 18th place. Rubens Barrichello, having dropped down to last place with his spin at the opening lap, is now up to 16th, scrapping with Jos Verstappen as we ride with Jarno Trulli. New helmet design this weekend, and he'll be changing it again for the next Grand Prix at Silverstone in 2 weeks' time. Apparently he's going for a chrome look, but hoping that the helmet brings him better luck. Here comes Barrichello. You can see attacking Verstappen. That's for 15th place as Rubens maintains his fight back.
Verstappen's doing a good job, though, and he's still having a go and nibble back at the Ferrari, but he's ahead of Frentzen in the Sauber and Fisichella in the Jordan, so Verstappen having a very good run relatively at the beginning of this Grand Prix. That's looking down the left-hand side of the nose cone, of course, of Barrichello. Remember, he spun at the end of the first lap. Mike Gascoigne is now talking to us from the pit wall. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Mike, technical director of the Renault team. Listen, what do you think so far? You think everyone's doing 3 stops today, Mike?
Well, all our calculations say that sort of 3 stops is going to be the way to go. I think all the top Michelin teams certainly are on that sort of strategy. I'd be surprised if they're not. And we really have to see how it holds up with Michael on the Bridgestone and see how their degradation goes. But I think about lap 14, 15, it's going to start getting quite exciting.
Michael Schumacher has just set the fastest first sector, Mike. Do you think his tyres are starting to kick in now a little bit?
I mean, it's hard to say because, I mean, the times are all pretty similar. I mean, we're struggling a little bit in Sector 1, which is pretty normal for us, but we're stronger in the two sectors. At the moment, it all looks very, very even amongst the top 7. I think it's going to be a good race.
Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be talking to you later. Mike Gascoigne, Technical Director of the Renault team, live from the pit wall. Nice little innovation there for F1 ITV viewers. And this is Rubens Barrichello. He is fighting his way through. He's in 15th place at the moment, closing in on the back of Nick Heidfeld in the Sauber, who's 14th. This is lap 9 then, and the gap between Ralf Schumacher and Juan Montoya pretty much being pegged at the moment. Montoya is on the same pace as the race leader. Raikkonen just dropping behind a fraction. Michael Schumacher still 4 or 5 tenths of a second slower than the two Williamses at the front. And this is very similar, really, to what we saw at the Nürburgring a couple of weeks ago, isn't it? But there, the Ferraris really weren't competitive. It was pretty much the first time for 3 years we've seen Ferrari unable to really have a shot at winning a Grand Prix. Here, it's a bit early to say, isn't it?
It is early to say, and you've got to bring certainly the Renault of Trulli into the equation as well. He is able to match the front runner's pace. Alonso not necessarily at this time, so there's still a 6-car race. Interestingly, Ralf Schumacher has now ceased pulling away from Montoya, and they're doing the same lap times as Barrichello, continuing his recovery, passes Heidfeld for 14th. But Ralf Schumacher's lead, 3.6 seconds then.
We're back riding on the front wing of Rubens Barrichello's Ferrari as he carves his way through the field. Clear track ahead of him at the moment, but he's closing in on the next car.
And a pretty good start for Mark Webber, who, by virtue of Rubens having that lose in the final complex at the end of the first lap, has moved into position 8. His initial pace, Bill, was a little bit slower than the front runners. He was in the low to mid-18s, but just in the last couple of laps now he's got that down into the mid-17s, which compares favourably with the front-running guys. Ralph, for example, has just turned a 1:16.6, Montoya a 1:16.8. They're the only two that are operating in the 16s at the moment. The next batch of cars, Raikkonen, Schumacher, Coulthard, Trulli, Alonso and indeed Mark, are all in the mid to high 17s. And I suspect that Webber has actually gone for the slightly harder of the Michelin options. Quite a lot of varieties open to them this weekend. 7 in total for the Bridgestone runners, 4 for the Michelin runners. And Webber was a bit dissatisfied with the tyre choice in the recent race at the Nürburgring last weekend, and felt that he and his engineer and the team were probably better able to make a judgment about the performance of their car and what tyre might best suit it, rather than going with the pack, which is what they were doing before with Michelin and the other teams. So it looks to me as though that car's just playing its pace in nicely at the moment, and even as I speak, he's actually further pulled that time down again.
The Renault's running pretty strongly, Neil, on what is basically a home track.
Yes, if they had the extra grunt that everybody talks about, they'd probably be well in the game. But we are ready to go back to Martin and James for the French Grand Prix.
Lap 11 of 60 here at Magny-Cours. This is Ralf Schumacher, I beg your pardon, race leader. He's set the fastest first sector of the race so far. 3.5 seconds, though, stubbornly. The gap between himself and Juan Montoya in second place. They're lapping in the high 1 minute 16s, but the pursuing Michael Schumacher in 4th place is half a second still slower than the pace of the front two. Kimi Raikkonen is trying to stay with the Williamses, but certainly at the moment they seem to be in a class of their own. Coulthard still 5th, Trulli still 6th, Alonso still 7th, and Webber still in 8th place. 70 laps this Grand Prix, I beg your pardon, not 60.
You're about to get a bit of a breakaway because Michael Schumacher is struggling to maintain the pace in 4th place. Behind him, Coulthard, Trulli, Alonso able to easily match him, but at the front now 0.6 of a second faster. Raikkonen 3rd, Montoya 2nd, and the very fast Ralf Schumacher leading are just going to start breaking away, because it seems as if the Ferrari cannot hold up that pace. There he is in front of Coulthard, just down the road there as they head towards the Nürburgring chicane. And you could see the direction change of Coulthard's car is incredible, and the Ferrari in front just flicking around almost like a video game. This is Verstappen, and Louise is down there.
Yeah, I just dropped down to the Jordan garage to see if I could find out what was going on with Ralph Furman. We saw he dropped to the back of the field. I've had a chat with the team. There are no problems with the car. There's absolutely nothing showing up on the telemetry, and no word from Ralph himself either. He is now right on Justin Wilson's tail, so he seems to have picked up the pace again. I can only assume that perhaps he's run wide somewhere.
Seems to be the way. We didn't see it on TV, and obviously the team don't know much about it either. But this is the view of the back of fourth place man Michael Schumacher, just peeping over the top of the head of David Coulthard. It's a better view of the racetrack than he's got as he peers over the top of the monocoque and down the road. It's a lovely cosy feeling inside a Formula 1 car. You feel very safe and very secure and very fast in there, and you also feel very much part of the car, but you do tend to be looking along the nose of the car, and often the racetrack disappearing out of view underneath the tyres. And look, the Renaults really are able to match Schumacher and Coulthard. Up at the front, though, there's a 3-second gap building now between Michael Schumacher at the top and Raikkonen in third.
Yeah, there's nothing to choose between them in terms of pace. The two Renaults and the McLaren of Coulthard and Michael Schumacher in front of them. So that is quite a tussle there, four-way tussle for fourth place. Just going back to the Ralph Furman situation, he is now in 18th place. He's got past Justin Wilson, and clearly Wilson was holding him up because he's going 2 seconds a lap faster than he was just a moment ago. And not a great weekend for the Jordan team. Fisichella, his teammate, is in 17th place, just in front of him. And well, we believe Jordan have got a radically revised car for Silverstone in 2 weeks' time, and it can't come soon enough. Here, though, the scrap for fourth still. Schumacher, Coulthard, Trulli, Alonso.
To put it in perspective, Michael Schumacher's now 11.8 seconds away from his brother, who's leading the race. So that is how much they're beginning to slip back. And they are all in the 117s, and the top three are all comfortably in the 116s.
Entering an interesting phase of the race now. This is lap 14 of 70. And we were hearing from Mike Gascoigne on the pit wall just before that everybody looks like they're three-stopping amongst the front runners. That will mean they're going to start making their pit stops in a couple of laps from now. We're expecting them in any time between lap 15, possibly 18, as far as they can go. Coulthard, a little twitch there on the steering wheel. The Ferrari in front just doesn't look very comfortable, does he?
Looks very slow under braking, which we saw, of course, in the Nürburgring last weekend. I spoke to Ross Brawn on the grid, chatting away to him, and I said, how's it looking? He said, I don't know, I'll find out in half an hour. Well, half an hour's passed since I talked to him, and it's not looking very bright unless Michael carries on 5-6 laps past the Williams. It's really not looking as if they've got the pace to easily win this Grand Prix.
Coming through to complete 14 laps. Ralf Schumacher is already up the road, 4.4 seconds now. He's extended the lead over teammate Montoya. And Raikkonen still third, Michael Schumacher fourth. We're on board with David Coulthard. And it's very interesting the way that the Michelin tyre, just in the last month really, has come good after a string of Ferrari victories. There is Jaguar into the pits.
Pizzonia in the pits then from 9th. So that's how much fuel he had on board. He stopped at the end of lap 14, and we're expecting the Grandees in sort of 15, 16, I would guesstimate. But nobody really knows. That's what I quite like about these new regulations. Nobody is absolutely sure when the cars are coming in except their own team. Coulthard then still very much steering at the back of Michael Schumacher. But what's happened here is the top three have got into a comfortable pace, and this little group behind Michael have settled in at the 17s, and that's so easy to do, to end up, you know, you've lost sight of the leaders and you feel you're absolutely on the ragged edge, but there is more pace to come, no doubt about it. I think if they were released, it's Michael that's struggling here. I think the three cars behind him, and Coulthard pits. McLaren obviously deciding to get him out of that little train, Ted.
Well, indeed, David Coulthard into the pits. Martin, does this tell us that he set his car up a little more for qualifying, ran a bit less fuel to get that confidence that he needed in qualifying? Very good pit stop, 7 seconds, classic three-stopper territory.
It's a great pit stop, but is it enough to get him in front of Michael Schumacher? We don't know yet until Schumacher stops. That's what he needs to do. That's how far Schumacher's got while Coulthard stops in the pit lane. He's down at Adelaide at the end, so that's 20-odd seconds ahead. Of course, he will stop, we think, quite soon. We'll find out if Coulthard had a qualifying setup when Raikkonen comes in, by and large, I'd imagine. But now this is a pivotal point in the early stage of this Grand Prix.
Michael Schumacher 1.2 seconds on that lap, slower than the Williams at the front. Cars pouring into the pit lane here. We've got Ralph Furman coming in from 18th place, certainly expecting some more of the front runners to start coming in too. There is Furman in the pit lane, so a relatively early stop for him.
The fastest lap from Ralf Schumacher, 1:16.3, as that Jordan pit stop is taking place. 9.8, not a good stop.
There's Trulli coming into the pits then, so as we expected, this is lap 17. In comes the Renault, and the great news for the front runners, certainly for Ralf Schumacher, as Kimi Raikkonen pits as well, is that they managed to open up such a gap over the sort of 9th and 10th place cars of Panis and Webber that they can feed back into the racetrack in front of all of them. So traffic is certainly not going to be an issue coming out of these pit stops for the front runners.
Where's Coulthard? That's the important point now. Has that affected the situation with David Coulthard? Can't see him around. We don't know if Trulli's cleared him or not, or is further behind him. Coulthard put in a very good middle and final sector, and we'll have to wait and see. Is that Coulthard down the road there? Yes, it is. So that position has not changed, and the key thing is when now is Michael Schumacher coming in. It's looking good for Williams, James. They're easily fastest and look like they're going to be one of the last to pit.
Yeah, that means they were carrying a bit more fuel than the other front runners yesterday in qualifying, and they still had enough speed to get themselves to the front of the grid. What an intriguing twist to the World Championship we've had in the last few weeks. Into the pits comes Juan Montoya from 2nd place. There he is, just clicking down his visor, making sure everything's okay. Quickest stop. So problem with the right rear. And that's a slow stop. The fuel was in ages ago. Here's Michael Schumacher. Now, can he get out in front of David Coulthard? These two battling for 4th place. Coulthard has certainly been going quick, no doubt about that. His outlap was pretty strong, and he's pushing very hard at the moment.
Coulthard's done a 15.9, the fastest lap of the Grand Prix, comfortably on those new Michelin tyres. And has that done enough? He's put in 3 or 4 red sectors on the computer. I'm expecting to see that McLaren ahead of the Ferrari. Their pit stops are about the same time. I think that is Coulthard down the road in front of Michael Schumacher.
Certainly looked like it, because there was a Renault behind the Ferrari. That was probably Jarno Trulli, and if that's the case, it means that Coulthard has jumped Michael Schumacher for 4th place. Ferrari really struggling here then, as Button pits.
Yes, as soon as Ferrari came in, it wasn't looking good, was it? In terms of they had no more fuel. And Ralf Schumacher, the leader, pits then, just gets the speed down to 50 miles an hour, 80 kilometres per hour. He is the 2nd team in line along the pit lane. And this needs to be something under 9 seconds. He already had a 4.5 second advance. Look at that, superb. Montoya's was 10.1 with the sticky rear wheel. But that's one of the quickest stops we've seen all year.
Certainly was. That was metronomic, absolutely precise. A bit like the driving of Ralf Schumacher at the moment. Certainly Frank Williams, team principal, paying tribute to his driver. The car is very drivable. It's not twitchy as it was earlier in the year, and that's really coming into playing for Ralf. He's able, the team was saying yesterday, to set the car up very quickly, to get into a comfort zone with it and extend himself in qualifying. And it's really the performance of the Williams team, and at the moment is certainly playing into Ralph's hands more than Montoya's. But bad luck really for Montoya there in that pit stop with the sticking rear wheel.
Yeah, that's going to make the gap ever bigger. Barrichello's going to be spitting feathers. He's certainly running longer than anybody else. He spun himself out at the end of lap 1. He's up to P10 now and has yet to make a fuel stop, and nor has D'Amata in the Toyota. So Barrichello may be carrying more fuel than anybody else, as when Ted spoke to him on the line, but he threw it away by spinning out.
This is lap 19 then. There's still the race leader after the first round of stops. Get out of the way, he says, Ralf Schumacher. Montoya lost a little time to him in that pit stop, and that allowed Kimi Raikkonen to close up a little bit onto him. He's just 1.8 seconds now behind Montoya. Coulthard 4th, Michael Schumacher 5th, Trulli 6th, 7th Alonso, and 8th at the moment, not having stopped, or just having stopped, Jacques Villeneuve.
Long way to go, of course, but Ralf Schumacher in line for a double in as many weeks as we see Cristiano D'Amato in for a longish pit stop there, depending on how much fuel they took on board. The other interesting pit stop was Juan Montoya's slight mishap, which puts him back on track a long way behind his teammate, but perhaps more importantly, slightly under threat now from Kimi Raikkonen in the McLaren.
Yes, but he's got astonishing pace, Billy, and just in the last couple of seconds he's turned the fastest lap of the race, a 1:15.660, and we've seen no one anywhere near those times in the race so far. So he's come out with another set of tyres on and perhaps has either repressured a set or has done something else to the setup of the car, perhaps in that stop that we didn't see. It was a slow one, but he's come out firing, and that's a very quick time. In fact, it's as much as probably near enough to a second quicker than anybody else on the road at this point in time, which is very, very quick.
Well, if Raikkonen can't catch the Williams today, and of course there's a long way to go, David Coulthard, his teammate, has done him a favour by jumping out in front of Michael Schumacher as we see Rubens come into pit now. And what a shame, Martin Brundle making the comment that Rubens on a slightly different strategy to Michael, but the spin just threw that out the window.
And just back on times again, Ralph, and his first flying lap on the new set of tyres has done a 1:15.7, so virtually matching the time that Montoya did. And on Montoya's second flying lap out of the pit, he's actually settled down to a 16 flat. So the cars have got enormous pace when they first bolt out the gate.
Just over 9 seconds, the stop from Barrichello. And again, he has to carve his way through this field as we rejoin Martin and James.
21 of 70. Nothing's changed here at Magny-Cours. Joining us on the pit wall once again, the technical director of the Renault team, Mike Gascoigne. Mike, anything there beyond what you expected?
No, in fact, I think it panned out pretty much totally as we expected, with Barrichello maybe on 2 stops and everyone else on similar strategy, stopping around the same time on 3 stops. But I think we were all being held up by Michael, and Coulthard obviously was able to get past, but we didn't change our front tyres at that stop, and we seem to be a little less competitive at the moment, so we're just trying to work out whether we've done the right thing there.
Yeah, you're back in the mid-17s now, Mike, and it is clear that as the stint unfolds, Michael's not got a great pace, has he, in that Ferrari with the Bridgestones, and that's going to compromise your afternoon, isn't it?
That's right. We've got to look at the next stop to do what David did in his, but unfortunately it means they're going to have got away from us, and it's probably going to take us the whole of the race to try and get both drivers past him.
Have you got to keep an eye on Barrichello coming through the field? Do you think he's got a lot of traffic in front of him now? His stop didn't work out well, and of course he threw it away with the spin, but surely you've got a cautious eye on him.
Yeah, I think the 2-stop strategy isn't going to pan out, and I think it'd have struggled anyway, and with the spin, I'd be surprised if he can make up the time, because he's just going to lose so much with the people who are in front of him.
Why didn't you change the front tyres? Because that's not worked for other Michelin runners earlier this year.
Yeah, we thought there was a bit of graining over the last couple of days, and that normally improves, and so for this first stint we wanted to leave the fronts on. We'll certainly change them in the next couple of stops.
What about the Williams team, Mike? I mean, they seem to be in a league of their own. We seem to have lost to BAR, actually, just before you answer that question. Jenson Button pulling off the track. But a word, Mike, quickly about the Williams team.
I mean, very impressive from where they were at the start of the year, where they really seem to be struggling. They do look the class of the field here. I think they work very hard on improving the car, and also with Michelin getting their car to work on the tyres.
Thanks very much, Mike. We'll hear from you a bit later on in the race. Here's a replay of Jenson Button, who's had a miserable weekend here in France. On Friday, the BAR team were victims of a seizure order by a broker of a sponsor 5 years ago, and Jenson and Jacques Villeneuve not able to take part in the first practice session as they were in court discussing that matter. They of course won that situation, and now obviously the rain-affected weekend as well. BAR not getting an awful lot of running in. Louise has news for us.
Disaster for Jenson Button. He came into the pits just a few laps ago, was stationary for quite a long time, 12.3 seconds. The team are having a bit of a problem with the fuel rig, and it appears that the fuel has not gone into the car. Jenson's run out of fuel, that's why he stopped on the track.
Okay, more bad luck for Jenson Button then. Something curious going on. I think it must be traffic. The two McLarens both had very slow laps. Michael Schumacher really reducing the gap to them. But now Michael's had a slow lap, so it must, I think, be lap traffic out there that's not in our camera shot at the moment. Mike Gascoigne talking about graining of the tyre. That's where you get little balls of rubber or little pieces of rubber on the surface that it disintegrates and the car tends to just slide along. It's like being on the ball bearings to a certain extent, and they're trying to avoid that zone. I thought Michelin pretty much got out of that anyway, but if they're struggling with their front tyres, they will lose a bucket load of lap time later on in this stint. But at the moment, they're keeping Michael Schumacher honest in the two Renaults. So Schumacher 5th, Trulli 6th, Alonso 7th.
Everybody has made one stop throughout the field. We've only got one retirement. This is lap 24. Ralf Schumacher leading by 7.5 seconds now from Juan Montoya. So he extended his advantage thanks to the slow pit stop for Montoya, who has been pushing very, very hard indeed after the first round of stops. Raikkonen is 12.5 seconds behind Ralf Schumacher. Coulthard 15 seconds behind. And Michael Schumacher almost a full 20 seconds behind. Martin, we really need to talk about this tyre situation because it's so black and white at the moment. Michael Schumacher, we saw him winning 4 Grand Prix in the trot, and all of a sudden he's struggling to get within a second of the Williamses. Clearly an enormous amount of development has gone on with Michelin, and Williams are reaping the benefits of it. But how can it be so black and white for Ferrari?
It's pretty much black and round as well, isn't it? I think it's because Michelin have moved forward with their construction, their compounds. They've worked hard with their two top teams, and in a way they've got feedback from McLaren and Williams, and as long as they're giving the same feedback, they're going to move forward faster than, say, Ferrari on the Bridgestone. So often we see Michelin, the weight of the Michelin runners way forward in qualifying, and the only two Bridgestones on the horizon are the two Ferraris. They're pretty much working out there by themselves. So you'd have to say they haven't stepped forward, whether it's because Williams and McLaren are giving better feedback or whether it's just a philosophy thing. That's Barrichello now getting quite heavily hooked up behind Villeneuve, and that's compromising him badly. His strategy now is, as Mike Gascoigne predicted, out of the window.
A few black clouds there hovering over the Nevers region of central France. We're about an hour and a half north of Clermont-Ferrand, about 3 hours south of Paris, in a very rural part of central France. Not a great deal to do in the evening round here, so a lot of people have been enjoying themselves in the paddock, having dinner in the motorhomes, and various motorhomes playing host throughout the weekend. A lot of talk going on in those motorhomes as well. Team owners having meetings discussing future formats and shapes of the Grand Prix. Maybe we might have some qualifying on a Sunday morning is one idea being mooted by some of the teams and by Bernie Ecclestone. Also discussion as Rubens Barrichello closes right in on the back of Jacques Villeneuve in that battle for 11th place. Discussion about Silverstone, a possible threat from Paul Stoddard, you will have heard about yesterday on F1 ITV, to protest the result at Silverstone due to some grey areas over the wording of the regulations regarding driver aids. That appears now to have gone away, and they seem to have sorted that difference out between the team owners. So looks like Silverstone in 2 weeks' time, which hopefully will be a cracking Grand Prix, as it always is, should also be one that doesn't end up in the steward's room afterwards. Well, running in 6th place at the moment, 25 seconds behind the race leader, but very much on the pace of Michael Schumacher. In front of him is Jarno Trulli, and Ted has some news on him.
Yes, James, it's a strong race by Trulli. He's had a couple of really dodgy races recently, but he has to push now because Fernando Alonso is going to stop 1 or 2 laps after him, and they're just about 4 seconds apart. So Trulli's really got to keep a move on if he's going to stay ahead of the Spaniard.
Yes, this is developing really into 3 separate races towards the front. The two Williams really are in a class of their own now in this second phase of the Grand Prix. So it's Ralf Schumacher 8 seconds ahead of Montoya. 7 seconds behind him is Raikkonen and Coulthard, who are just a couple of seconds apart and lapping very similarly in terms of lap time. And then Michael Schumacher's fallen away from the two McLarens. He's fifth, 3.7 seconds behind, and he's really got a job on his hands keeping the Renaults at bay through the afternoon.
Quick shot there we saw of the sporting director of the Ferrari team, Jean Todt, and he's celebrating 10 years in the saddle as the boss of Ferrari. Joined on the 1st of July 1993, and I think he probably thought that he'd like to celebrate his 10 years with Michael Schumacher's 50th win for Ferrari, which is the next one he will be notching up, but it's not going that way at all at the moment. We talked about the tyres a minute ago, Martin. The key question is, how long will it take Bridgestone to sort this problem out, to get on terms with Michelin? Can they do it in the next few races, or are we looking at half a season or even longer?
Well, the problem they've got is this huge testing ban that's coming up through the summer, James. So a lot of the development on these cars is going to be locked off certainly after Hockenheim. And so this next 3 or 4 weeks is crucial. If they don't do it then, they're really not going to get the job done much before September, no doubt about that. So it's affecting a lot of people, isn't it? And good news for the championship, mind you. At the moment, Raikkonen ahead of Michael Schumacher. Is going to tighten that up. And as ever, Williams threatening their incredible march towards an awful lot of World Championship points.
Well, indeed, Ralf Schumacher is only 15 points behind his brother in the championship fight. If he can stay where he is today and get 10 points, with Michael Schumacher only picking up 4 or 5, depending on where he finishes. He's currently in 5th place, then that's going to narrow it down a great deal. Kimi Räikkönen, as you say, is also going to narrow down the margin, but a long way to go yet. We're not even at half distance in this 70-lap Grand Prix, riding on board with Michael Schumacher. Let's look carefully at what's going on here.
This is the new section. Lycée it's called, and then he's just got to take well, that's a lot of curb. He's got the car quite nicely set up to bounce across those curves, but he's pushing hard, taking that amount of curb for an entire 70-lap distance. That fast run then into Estoril, and the car normally just wanders wide there, but you know instinctively you've got enough space to bury the throttle into the bulkhead. And Ralf Schumacher then lapping fellow countryman Frentzen 14th already. We're on lap 29, and he's lapping 14th place man already. That is the pace of this Williams this afternoon. His lead remains 8.2 seconds.
Certainly does, over Montoya. Raikkonen 3rd, Coulthard 4th, Michael Schumacher 5th, 23 seconds behind his brother now. Trulli 6th, Alonso 7th, and we haven't seen him much this afternoon, but I can tell you in 8th place, the Jaguar of Mark Webber.
Welcome back, and in case you had your eyes closed momentarily, the split between the two Williams is just over 8.2 seconds now. Ralf Schumacher in command of the French Grand Prix, and almost all these guys are on a 3-stop strategy. We've established that. But Mark Webber, he was mentioned just before the break, and like the Nürburgring, we haven't seen too much of him. Neil, what do you make of his performance so far?
Well, it's interesting, Bill, because we're seeing fluctuation in his times and also in probably all of the key runners, certainly the first third of the field. And I'm wondering whether or not this is a part of the process that goes on at Magny-Cours where times do fluctuate. I'm not sure. I don't think traffic's really playing a role here, but Mark's lap times just in recent laps have sort of been in the low 18s. Just as I speak, he's pulled a 17.6 on lap 29. But he's having a fairly lonely old race out there at the moment. He's 7 odd seconds behind Alonso, and he's about 8 seconds in front of his teammate Pitsonia. But he is in the points, and that's good. We've still got a race on our hands. I don't think it's over by a long shot at this stretch of the game. And the interesting thing here is we've got very reliable field once again, Bill. We're not seeing a lot of people dropping out, and bizarre circumstances for Button for that car to have run out of fuel with, again, another rig problem.
Well, you mentioned fluctuating times. I mean, as you spoke, everyone would have been watching the screen and seeing the fluctuating differential between Ralf and Juan, and they have clear track ahead of them, so that is also adding to what you were saying before.
And they're back in the mid-16s now. Schumacher on the last lap 30, 16.5, 16.4 for Montoya, 16.6 for Raikkonen. They're the only guys in the mid-16s at the moment. We are just about ready to go back to France as Pitsonia comes in and we join ITV.
A Approaching half distance in the French Grand Prix at Magny-Cours. James Allen and Martin Brundle with you. This is Antonio Pizzonia making his second stop of the afternoon in the Jaguar. He's had probably his best Grand Prix so far. He's been following his teammate Mark Webber. He was 10 seconds behind the Australian when he made his pit stop, but still, in position terms, Webber 8th and Pizzonia was 9th before that stop. So the strategy for the Brazilian of making the first pit stops each round seems to have worked.
Raikkonen pits earlier than you would have expected, I have to say. He pitted after Coulthard last time around. So wonder why that is. If they didn't quite get the fuel in they wanted, about 7.2, wasn't it, of fuel going in. So surely staying on a 3-stopper, but I was not expecting Raikkonen to bolt in the pits there at the end of lap 31. Coulthard was catching him quite quickly, actually. Bit of a dilemma there for McLaren as to what they do, because Raikkonen needs all the points he can get in the World Championship fight, but Coulthard appears to have the faster car on the afternoon.
Well, Coulthard, as Mark Webber pits there, the other Jaguar driver, he was in a points-paying position, 8th place, looking for his 5th points finish of the year. Coulthard is currently 7th in the World Championship on 25 points to Kimi Raikkonen's 51. So although mathematically he's still in the hunt, you've got to say, with the performance that the Renault team, the BMW Williams team are showing at the moment, that, as you say, Raikkonen needs all the points he can get, because Ralf Schumacher is coming fast up on the rails in this year's Drivers' World Championship.
The lead just coming down a bit, 7.8 seconds now, as I think Ralph's been getting a bit of traffic. Montoya's been pegging him on lap time anyway, and Coulthard pits now too, so they've just flip-flopped the two McLarens round for whatever reason.
Yeah, Coulthard making an earlier stop than expected before, because he leapfrogged very, very quick there. He leapfrogged Michael Schumacher, so they short-filled him, I think, to get him out in front of Michael Schumacher. And it worked last time round. He shouldn't have too much problem rejoining in front of Michael Schumacher when he makes his stop, because Coulthard had a 5-second advantage over the German before he came in just then.
Yes, and I could see Raikkonen still in front of Coulthard as he exited the pits. So no change then for 3rd and 4th place McLaren, as Ralf continues to make his way through the back markers. That's 12th place man De Matter has just been lapped.
So let's talk a little bit about the psychology within the Williams team at the moment. They've clearly got a dominant package and they want to absolutely capitalise on it. But there's no team orders at Williams. Both drivers are free to race each other. And Montoya must be realising now that if he doesn't start winning some races and getting into this championship hunt, he's going to sit there and watch his teammate Ralf Schumacher marching into the championship fight. So today really a day when they've got this advantage. He's got to try and do something about it, hasn't he?
Yes, Williams don't really need team orders right now. I still think they compromised themselves in Melbourne, in Montreal, by not letting Montoya have a go at Michael. We've seen what Montoya does when he has a go at Michael, and it's somewhat more dramatic than when Ralf has a go at his brother. But you have to say they don't really need team orders, because Ralf is so fast at the moment and doing such a great job. He really does look confident in the car. The car's responding well. Those wider front Michelins clearly balance that car up very nicely, and Ralf just relentlessly on his way. But as we speak, Montoya's starting to pump out some pretty quick laps. I think you're right, James. He's realised that, hey, I've really got to get back on terms there. The lead is now down to 6.5 seconds, mostly because Ralf has been passing traffic.
Yes, there can't be much worse than being the teammate of a world champion in a year when you've got a dominant car, and it sort of begs the question, well, why didn't you do the job? Why weren't you quicker weekend after weekend? Montoya did win, of course, the Monaco Grand Prix. He was the first one to get the win on the board for Williams this season. But Ralf Schumacher, with his metronomic, to use the word again, pace as Montoya comes into the pits. Ralf Schumacher's had points in every Grand Prix this season. Montoya has had some non-finishes, and that's the difference between them. Ted?
Well, no problems with the Williams pit stop this time. A little uptake of the pneumatic air system. I think they put a bit more air into that engine system. We'll keep across that one. Jarno Trulli's next in for Renault. They're going to change all tyres, as we heard, and then add a bit more front wing to balance out the car. Here he comes now.
Yes, the only thing you can't really add at the pit stop is oil. You cannot add oil to a car, but they can top up the hydraulic, compressed air system, and that's a great stop from Renault. 6.2 seconds, but I don't believe it's anything like enough to get him in front of Michael Schumacher.
No, we've certainly changed the front tyres this time, haven't they? That was a mistake then as Mike Gascoigne was telling us from the pit wall after the first round of pit stops, not changing the front tyres on the Renault certainly cost them in terms of lap time. And it's not exactly set them up, given them a platform from which to attack Michael Schumacher. Trulli was 5 seconds behind the German before he dived in for his stop. So unless Michael Schumacher hits some traffic or has some problems, as Ralf Schumacher comes into the pits, and one of the Ferraris is expected as well.
It won't be Barrichello. Barrichello was the next man to be lapped if Ralf hadn't have pitted there. This should be a 6-point something again. And the nozzle was out in good time, so solid pit stop for Ralf Schumacher. Panis is in from 8th place too in the Toyota.
Back out onto the racetrack. This is what it feels like, building up to speed then. Don't cut across that white line. That's what several drivers, including Michael and Ralf Schumacher, did last year. Michael Schumacher is into the pits right beneath us as well. New set of boots going on to him. And, well, unless he loses a lot of time, he should maintain that position over Jarno Trulli.
Yes, he had an advantage of about 3.5 seconds, and certainly haven't seen anything on his in-lap or his pit stop that would compromise that. Trulli's not been lapping that quickly either, so Michael Schumacher should resume in what is effectively 5th place. Your leader then.
Well, Fernando Alonso has not yet pitted, so one of the two Renaults trying something a little bit different. Let's see if that pays off for him. He's not really close enough to have a go at Michael Schumacher. Alonso not really quite on the pace of his teammate Trulli this weekend. It's been a while since we've been able to say that. Trulli definitely having the upper hand within the Renault setup.
Coulthard within 0.8 of a second now of his teammate. We'll be picking him up soon if the race director's got his eyes open, because quite a little battle then brewing up between the two McLaren drivers. We'll have to wait and see how Montoya's pit stop works out before we know what the lead situation is. Montoya's just done a new fastest lap, smashed, as Coulthard had it before, on a 1:15.9. Montoya's just put in a 1:15.5. Kind of suggests, James, that they could go faster if they had to, doesn't it, the Williams? If you can just suddenly find 7/10. Ted?
Well, here comes Fernando Alonso into his pit box. Will he be able to overtake his teammate Jarno Trulli on this? They changed tyres. He's been asking for more front wing on the radio, so they put that on the Renault. Good stop, 6.6. Where's Trulli, though?
Trulli's just gone past our window, Ted, and well on his way into turn 1, so nothing changing then for Alonso. Montoya's just smashed the first sector time as well. He is absolutely on a mission now to close that gap.
He really is. He's taking advantage of the fact that this was the period around which Ralf Schumacher was making his stop slightly slow. You can see how hard Ralf Schumacher's going now in response. He does not want his teammate to spoil his party here this weekend. He's driving absolutely beautifully at the moment, Ralf Schumacher. Montoya on the attack, which is certainly pretty exciting to watch. Joining us once again then after that round of pit stops from the Renault timing stand, technical director of Renault, Mike Gascoigne. Mike, your two drivers having a good scrap there.
Yeah, I mean, we hope to be able to get up to Michael and jump him in the pit stop, but we weren't able to do that or get close enough. We struggled a little bit with traffic. But we're looking to do a sort of a shorter stint this stint to see if we can tow our way up and use some new tyres in the pit stop to try and jump him.
Mike, Michelin have really been strong these last few races. I suggested it might be because you've got Williams and McLaren feeding them a lot of information. I should have said Renault too, of course. Do you think, are you guys working together hard on that? How close are your tyres? Two questions, really. How close are your tyres to the Williams and McLaren ones too?
I mean, we tend to be easier on the tyre, Martin, and we tend to try and run a softer tyre and try and get an advantage on that. That certainly worked for us early in the year. I think here we're all on the same tyre, and I think that, you know, Michelin have done a fantastic job. They used to suffer a lot with graining, and they've really got that graining under control, which means that we don't have to do any of the scrubbing, and we can really push all the way through the stint in a race.
Yes, but do you share information? Why have Michelin moved ahead of Bridgestone?
I mean, they are a very, very good tyre company. I think it took them a while to catch up, but I think ultimately they do have 3 top teams, so they're doing a lot more testing than Bridgestone perhaps just concentrating on Ferrari. So they've got 3 teams testing, doing a lot of work, and I think that's allowed them to push forward.
Final question, Mike. We heard you say you're doing a short middle stint here with your drivers. At the moment, it looks as though Trulli has the upper hand over Alonso. That's been unusual in terms of the recent times. Is that the way it is? And what are your expectations for this race?
Well, I think certainly Jarno's driving very well. We felt he had the edge over Fernando at the Nürburgring as well. He certainly looked quicker, and he's been more on it this weekend, and certainly is very consistent. I mean, Jarno can be frustrating in the race at times, but when it's perfect and he gets it right, he is one of the quickest guys out there.
Thanks very much, Mike. We'll speak again later on. There's a pass there between Frentzen and Heidfeld, and that's allowing the McLarens to come through. They're lapping the 2 Saubers. Frentzen in front of teammate Heidfeld there, and they're running around in 14th and 15th places, which is pretty ignominious stuff for the Sauber team. The bad news for all of the back markers really is that the reliability this afternoon, I hesitate to say it, but the reliability this afternoon has been unbelievable. Only Jenson Button has pulled out of the race, and that was because he ran out of fuel, so nothing wrong with his car. It's really been absolutely staggering, and considering the cars have spent the night in Parc Ferme, that's a pretty good effort. There you can see Michael Schumacher. He is behind the 2 McLarens of Raikkonen and Coulthard, and if he maintains this, he's going to finish only in 5th place today.
Interesting though, isn't it? As the McLarens got held up there, really passing the fighting Saubers, it's really put Michael Schumacher back in the zone. The Raikkonen and Coulthard 17s and 18s, as Michael pulls a 16.6 out of the bag, and the gap is down to just 2.5 seconds all of a sudden. So some work to be done then by the McLaren drivers to regain that ground they lost, clearing. Whenever you've got 2 back markers fighting each other, it always costs you a lot more time. They're not watching you. And Coulthard going too deep there into Adelaide, pushing very late on the brakes, cost himself a touch more time. Clearly wanting to reduce that gap back down again to a few tenths of a second that he'd made to the back of Raikkonen.
Well, Coulthard has an important role to play here because he needs to protect the tail of teammate Raikkonen. Obviously, if he gets a chance to pass him, I'm sure he'll take it. But clearly, in the points battle, Michael Schumacher honing in on the 2 of them. Coulthard does need to make sure that Michael doesn't score any points that are absolutely necessary here this afternoon. Well, as I said, the only man to drop out of the Grand Prix today has been Jenson Button, and the unfortunate man is talking with Luis now. Come along then in 2 weeks' time to Silverstone and cheer on Jenson Button. He can do with all the help he can get at the moment, chasing some performance, chasing some results, and I'm sure he'd love to see you in the grandstands at Silverstone in a couple of weeks' time. This is lap 41. Ralf Schumacher is leading by just 3.8 seconds now from Montoya, who is siding into the lead of his teammate. Raikkonen's 3rd, Coulthard's 4th, Michael Schumacher 5th, Trulli 6th, Alonso 7th, and Webber, we haven't seen him, but he's still in 8th place.
Grand Prix, Magny-Cours, and there's action here with the Jordan under attack.
It's Olivier Panis, the only Frenchman in the field in the Toyota, and he's currently running 10th. Been a pretty fraught couple of weeks for these guys after looking very strong in practice at the Nürburgring. Now focusing on Mark Webber, he's position 8 at the moment. He's just done his personal best fastest lap of a 1:17.1, and at that speed rate, Billy, that actually puts him in the elite. Ralph's last lap, for example, was a 17.1, 17.2 for Montoya, 16.8 for Raikkonen, 16.7 for Coulthard. Looking here at the Jordan, and he's really got some pace now. So it's very difficult to know precisely who's done what with this front tyre situation with the Michelins, whether or not they're changing them. And you don't always get to see the subtle changes in front wing adjustments when they do make a stop. But whatever Mark has done, he's come back out now and he's got good pace. And he may be able to get to Trulli or Alonso.
I was going to say, based on the times you've got, will he hold off this bloke, Rubens Barrichello?
Well, he's about 5/10 of a second quicker on the last lap, and Mark's reeled off a series of 17.1s. He did 3 of them in a row, so he's very, very consistent. But there's a possibility. I think he might be able to hold off Rubens, but I'm excited at the prospect he might get to the Renaults.
A couple of intra-team battles going on. The Renaults are one of them. Of course, we have the McLarens together on the track, and that is a long way from over, within a second of each other. And up the front, of course, the Williams, and Montoya is capable of anything. So a very interesting race. We'll go back to them right now with Jean Todt in focus.
Lap 43 at Magny-Cours. Ralf Schumacher is now responding to teammate Juan Montoya. You've missed nothing, but he is putting the hammer down. He is 5.5 seconds clear of his teammate in the lead. And through the traffic a few minutes ago, Montoya able to close the gap, but now Montoya has been encountering that same traffic. In fact, well, that was the lap before. He's now got the gap down to 4.4 seconds. So it's a straight fight between the two Williams drivers at the front. 22 seconds behind race leader Ralf Schumacher are the two McLarens of Raikkonen and Coulthard, circulating absolutely together as they have for much of this Grand Prix. Michael Schumacher has dropped behind them. He is in 5th place. Trulli is 6th, Alonso 7th, and Webber in 8th place. And it's still only Button, the only retirement of the afternoon.
Is indeed. It's pretty much status quo. Raikkonen just keeping about 2 seconds ahead of Coulthard, and Michael Schumacher cannot improve on the 2.5. He closed the gap down to behind them. Ted has some news on Jarno Trulli.
I'm afraid it's some very bad news. He's radioed in with a problem. He thinks it's a throttle problem. He's asked if he can come into the pits. His lap times are tumbling all over the place. He's asked if he can come in. His engineers have said, stay out while they check the data, but it's not looking good. I hope it's not terminal, but I have a feeling it is.
Yes, he lost 10 seconds on the previous lap. Oh. There he is now, and it looks like it's a touch more than a throttle problem, doesn't it? It looks like there's a few bits mashed into his throttle
That's
system.
A different car. It's Alonso.
It is indeed, James.
We could have a double Renault retirement going on here if we're not careful. That's a lot of smoke out of the back of Alonso's car, seizes the rear wheels, oil gets on the tyres, and around he goes. There's Trulli, and you can see he's going slowly. He's dropping places as well. So this is great news for Rubens Barrichello, although it's terrible news for the Renault team, because that could promote Rubens up into 7th place.
Yeah, well spotted. That's the second Renault then. So we've got one Renault asking to come in, and the other one is about to lunch itself at the end of the back straight. Alonso kept it together. Mike, what can you tell us from down on the pit wall?
Well, it's not been the best couple of laps of my racing life. Obviously, we lost Fernando's engine. We can't diagnose the problem with Jarno at the moment. He's losing a lot of straight line speed. He's full throttle and slowing down on the straight. So, looks like it's not going to be a great day.
So are you just going to keep him out there? He's now doing 1 minute 32s. Is there any point in keeping him out there?
No, I mean, we're obviously going through the data. We can't see anything. I think we'll get him in and have a look at it fairly soon.
Giancarlo Fisichella there just retiring from the Grand Prix as well. That looks like another engine blow-up. Why is this happening at the moment, Mike? Is this a particularly stressful time of the race for the cars?
Not really. We've had pretty good engine reliability this year, so it was certainly unexpected with Fernando, but I don't think there's anything in particular. It just seems to be happening as a coincidence.
How are you going to be fixed at Silverstone in 2 weeks' time? Is that going to be a good track for you?
Should be a good track. I mean, it's where aerodynamics are very important, very similar to Barcelona, where we had our strongest race. So, yeah, we'll have to get it back together and look to come back at Silverstone.
Well, thanks very much for talking to us today. I'm really sorry your race ended early, but it's been great having your input from the pit wall. Thanks a lot, Mike Gascoigne.
Yep, thanks, James.
OK, then, what's going on back on the racetrack? Montoya's got the gap down to just 3.5 seconds now to race leader Ralf Schumacher. Raikkonen's 20 seconds behind them, but Coulthard now just 1.5 behind him, and they've dropped Michael to 3.7. Fisichella lost quite a lot of oil as Barrichello Barrichello makes his second and final scheduled stop of the afternoon. And he is now, with the Renault demise, he's in for a couple of World Championship points. Panis is currently 8th behind him for another championship point. But a good scrap then between the two McLarens. But for some reason, Michael Schumacher just beginning to fall away, as we saw at the end of the first stint of the afternoon, James.
Well, the curse of the commentator strikes again. I was just saying how Button had been the only retirement from the race, and all of a sudden we've got Fisichella, Trulli, who's still running at the moment, but very slowly, and Alonso going out. So let's hope we don't have too many more. As the D'Amato, the Toyota, in 10th place pits. And that's good. The demise of those cars, the two Renaults particularly, has played into the hands of Olivier Panis, celebrating 10 years in Grand Prix racing, and what better way to celebrate than by scoring some World Championship points. And he is in 8th place at the moment, and that would give him 1 point.
Look at that. Montoya 2.5 seconds behind now. Ralph just did a 1:18.0. Why is that? Montoya in the same short straight as him now. He'll come into view, I think, in this shot. If they just stay, if they look up the hill now as Ralph comes down. Now, we've not got that shot, but Louise is in the pits, and we've got a Renault.
Must be Trulli.
It must be Trulli, of course, finally grinding to a halt. They didn't manage to get him in the pits, and we'll go back to Louise in a moment when we've worked out where and what's happening with Jarno Trulli. Rated in, said he thought he got a throttle problem. Looked like quite a lot of unburnt fuel coming out of the back of the left bank of the V10 there. Now we'll go down to Louise.
Well, you can see the flame coming out of the back of the car of Jarno Trulli. Very unfortunate for the Renault team. And as Mike Gascoigne was telling us, 1,500 employees here this weekend. They'll go away empty-handed. There's Kimi Raikkonen pitting from 3rd place, podium position potentially here for Raikkonen. He can do nothing about the pace of the Williams at the front, but he can try and stay ahead of teammate Coulthard. An opportunity perhaps for Coulthard through the pit stops. Well, we'll see if he takes it. He'll need a very quick in-lap and out-lap in order to beat his teammate, but there was nothing in it between them when Raikkonen made that stop.
Yes, if it was a true 8.0 pit stop, the Coulthard's final stop, there should be something in the 7s. Has got to be doable, and depends on his in-lap. We'll watch the various sector times. Normally, if you stop later, and of course they flip these two McLarens around in their pit stop schedule. I'm not quite sure why, but Raikkonen then under pressure from Coulthard. Michael Schumacher now 4 seconds behind David Coulthard in 5th place, way ahead of Webber in 6th.
There is Coulthard. We ride on board with him in 4th place at the moment.
Keeping a slightly right line down the hill there because of Fisichella's trail of oil. On board then with Coulthard as he's 3rd team down. Look for the black overalls. In he goes. If they can do something in under 7. Ted.
It's a little problem trying to get the fuel hose on. No, well, I'm not sure that they've got enough fuel in that. No, they haven't. They've had to swap to the spare rig. Oh, disappointment for David Coulthard. Now the fuel is going in. David's riding the car right on the limiter.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, it's pulled out.
The reserve fuel hose did not come out properly, and that's a loose helmet on the ground there. I think we didn't see where the lollipop went up. That's released Michael Schumacher ahead of him, no doubt about it. That's put Coulthard back into 5th place. The reserve, I think the man, he pulled the hose out, he pulled the nozzle out, and it didn't release. And everybody triggers to the pull, and off it goes. And I've done that in sports car racing. There it goes. The hose just wouldn't come out. I don't think anybody got hit by the tyre. But see, the hose was effectively out, but just didn't do the full pull. And Coulthard would have been given. The lollipop was up. Don't think that's down to David, that one. The lollipop was up. The hose was effectively all the way out.
And did you see that? The fuel man who'd been pulled over there, Steve Farrow, his name is, nicknamed Forklift, absolute bull of a man, has been doing this refueling job for many, many years. He was lying on the floor waving his arm saying, "Get on, David, get out there." That's what you call team spirit.
Absolutely. So the reserve hose not releasing cleanly then on the McLaren. And how many refueling rig problems are we going to see in Formula One before they somehow find a fix for this?
Meanwhile, something's been going on at the front in the shape of one Montoya getting faster and faster. Ralf Schumacher is in traffic. You can see it for yourself. He's in amongst the battle between Frentzen, D'Amato, the Toyotas there. and it's really playing into the hands. So beg your pardon, it's Heidfeld in the mix there, but it's playing into the hands of Juan Montoya, who badly wants to win this Grand Prix and get himself hoisted up the World Championship. Long way to go here, 21 laps still to go, and an awful lot of needle as Montoya dives into the pits.
Bit of luck for Montoya there, because Ralph had put 2 cars between himself and his chasing teammate at a pivotal part of the race again, and Montoya didn't have to negotiate them, just steamed down the pit lane, and a solid, if not spectacular, stop for Juan Pablo Montoya. Now it's all down to the second stop for Williams, and we saw what happened to the second stop for McLaren.
Yes, it just goes to show what happened with David Coulthard can happen to anybody. It could happen to race leader Ralf Schumacher here this afternoon. It's not happened for Juan Montoya. He is back out on track. He's got new tyres. He's got fuel to go to the finish, and he is going to go flat out to try and win the French Grand Prix away from his teammate. He was 2.5 seconds behind Ralf Schumacher when he made that pit stop. These laps now absolutely critical to the outcome of the Grand Prix. Ralf Schumacher needs a clear track, and he needs to go as fast as he possibly can.
Coulthard's rejoined then 9.5 seconds behind Kimi Raikkonen, and Schumacher was only 4 seconds behind them before the stops began, and therefore I'm absolutely sure Michael Schumacher, crucially, will be just 1 World Championship point now behind Kimi Raikkonen.
Oh, in comes Ralf Schumacher, so we didn't have very long to wait to see what would happen. Has Montoya been able to do enough? He's set the fastest middle sector on this lap. It's got to go very well, this stop, for Ralf Schumacher to maintain the lead. Well, that's what I would call very well.
That was a good stop, and look, Patrick Head there seeing, where's the other one? Where's the other one? Is it going to happen? He goes past our window.
Oh, it's in the close.
It's going to be very close. There we go. Ralph should just keep it. As long as he doesn't cross the line, he'll be fine.
Oh! That's close. That's half a second close. Another fraction in the pit stop, and that would have been Montoya's race. Now, well, it still could be. He showed 2 weeks ago, attacking another Schumacher, Michael Schumacher at the Nürburgring. He's not afraid to overtake. His tyres are up to speed. He is up to speed. Ralf Schumacher has to get up to speed after his pit stop, and this is going to be nip and tuck to the finish here.
So if you were the team boss now, then all the stops are over. What would you do? Say, OK, boys, 1, 2 to the end, take it easy. You've got a commanding lead here. Or do you do, as I suspect Frank and Patrick would, just say, go for it. Best man wins.
Lick your lips, sit back, cross your arms, and enjoy the remaining 18 laps of this Grand Prix. Never really been team orders at the Williams team, only very occasionally towards the end of the season when you have a clear number 1, number 2 situation evolving, like we did with Prost and Damon Hill in the early days. But right here with these 2 very evenly matched drivers, neither of whom particularly understand the word move over or keep position or hold station, we will see.
Ralph looking faster at the moment, though, isn't he? Pulled that gap back out. He's just finished what is his out lap then. So Ralph definitely stretching that lead. He's got the fresher tyres on as Michael Schumacher pits from what was 3rd, will become 4th after this stop. Car's down already, look. Just the refueling always takes longer than the tyres, and off he goes. That will put him in a very solid 4th place.
Yeah, the misfortune of David Coulthard then in his pit stop.
You're going to see Raikkonen flash round the outside any moment now. Does he get in front of Michael Schumacher or not? Did Raikkonen get in front of Schumacher? So I saw a McLaren going past the window. I'm sure it was Raikkonen, and it'll be really interesting to see how that one worked. I was amazed I didn't see him come into view around on Michael Schumacher's onboard camera. We'll have a look.
Well, we'll sort that one out. Meanwhile, you can see that Montoya is not really able to get much closer to the back of Ralf Schumacher, who's adapted very well then after his pit stop. There's nothing to choose between the 2 of them. They have been driving very, very consistently all afternoon. And whenever Montoya has just needed to close the gap right down, he's not been able to do it.
Panis from 7th. Final stop of the afternoon. Michael Schumacher is ahead of Kimi Raikkonen. I haven't seen it on screen, but I'm pretty sure Schumacher cleared, crucially, the McLaren of Raikkonen with his in-lap and the pit stop, and that will put a big smile on the faces of the Ferrari boys on the pit wall, as he definitely is. We'll watch him come over the line, James, out the window, because we can't see him on the TV. There goes...
Yep, he's ahead.
Yep.
Absolutely, and ahead by a few car lengths as well, so that'll be enormously frustrating for the McLaren team. I mean, Coulthard, you can understand why he lost the position to Michael Schumacher. He had that enormously long pit stop when the fuel rig didn't work, but Raikkonen, that's hard to fathom.
It is, especially the 1:19.1 that Raikkonen's just pulled out of the bag, which is 3 seconds away from the pace. And Coulthard, one more time then, homing in quickly on 4th place man Raikkonen. Now, finally, we can hear from Louise with Fisichella. Very sad, Giancarlo Fisichella there, and understandably he was 3.5 seconds away from pole. And you've got to feel sorry for a young driver of that calibre. It's really not working at all well at a rather important time in his career. It's Villeneuve pit exiting. He was in 9th when he came in, so still no BAR in the points. This is Montoya, and Ralph really has stretched the lead back out to 3.5 seconds now. So that superiority, you can just see him in the far distance there. That superiority he had in the first part of the Grand Prix, he's re-establishing now.
So why is it that Ralf Schumacher has got a bit of a margin over Juan Montoya at this point in the season? Well, certainly yesterday Patrick Head was saying that Ralf Schumacher tends to arrive at the racetrack, and his experience is the big thing. He's able to set the car up really very quickly, and it makes a significant difference. Montoya has been chasing the setup throughout the weekend, still chasing it going into qualifying, and you can see here today that Ralf Schumacher just has a car under him that is working slightly better. Louise is with Jarno Trulli, the other Renault driver.
Yeah, double disappointment for Renault this weekend. Jarno, have you worked out what the problem was yet?
I think it was a silly problem, like an engine command. So unfortunately, it wasn't responding anymore. It was not a failure, but probably just a silly problem which stopped us. And you know, home Grand Prix, we were doing well. I was doing a good race, and unfortunately again another DNF.
Could not have happened at a worse time for you, could it?
Yes, everything was working very well from the beginning. I was keeping up the pace together with the top team, and unfortunately something happened. We still have to investigate, but for sure it's an engine command.
Bad luck, Jarno.
So both Renaults out of this Grand Prix. Fernando Alonso with an engine failure as well. We're riding on board with Ralf Schumacher, and believe it or not, the car in front is a Ferrari. Rubens Barrichello in 7th place at the moment, and Ralf Schumacher's coming up to lap him. The reason why Rubens Barrichello is so far behind, first of all, he qualified 8th on the grid, but secondly, in the very early stages of the Grand Prix, he had a big spin out of the final chicane, this chicane right here, and dropped to the back of the field. It's been a spirited fight back by the Brazilian ever since, but 7th place it is, and a lap down at the moment to the race leader.
Yes, and he lost a lot of time too in amongst the BARs, where he was racing them for position as he was on a comeback drive, and understandably they wouldn't let him through. He was lapping some 2 seconds away from his ultimate pace. Compromise his afternoon. He's going to luck into a couple of World Championship points at least, it seems, due to the rather sad demise of our team of the weekend, Renault. Ted, what can you tell us about McLaren?
Martin, the paramedics have been into the McLaren garage to check on the fueler, Steve Morrow. He actually shooed them away. He's fine. He's as hard as nails, that man, as you said, James. Why did it happen? Well, DC was on the limiter for so long while they were changing those fuel rigs. I think it could have been a failure in the pit launch system. That happened to DC at the Nürburgring. Could well have happened again.
Nice name for a restaurant, actually, Nürburgring.
Yes. I still think they thought the nozzle, well, the nozzle was effectively out, but hadn't quite cleared. I still think the team thought the car was ready to go, but we'll find out no doubt after the Grand Prix. Ralf Schumacher stretched that lead to 4.9 seconds now. The other fight between 4th and 5th place man Raikkonen and Coulthard down to just 5.5.
Ralf Schumacher on a hot streak here. I don't know what Juan Montoya has to do to reel him in,
Very interesting, though. We said watch out for Michael Schumacher, and somehow, given the superiority or apparent superiority of Williams and McLaren over Ferrari, Ferrari has contrived to land Michael in third spot. In front of the McLarens, a lot of frantic activity going on back in the pits, as you would imagine. Williams trying to consolidate their position, but McLaren with a bit of work to do, Neil. I wonder if those Bridgestones will hold up and whether we'll see a challenge from Raikkonen and perhaps even Coulthard on Michael Schumacher in the remaining laps.
Well, there's 7 seconds separating Michael and Kimi at the moment, in fact a little bit more than that, so I'm not sure whether we're going to see too much more action. The key stops have all now been completed. All the main players were on a 3-stop strategy with the exception of Rubens, who turned out to be on the 2-stop, and it's been a pretty tough day for him after tripping over that exit curb, or the apex curb coming off the last corner at the end of the first lap. It was interesting there looking at Patrick Head in solid discussion with his crew on the pit wall. Looking at the lap times at the moment between Ralph and Juan Pablo Montoya, 17.4 for Ralph on the last lap, 18.3 for Montoya. So Ralph's car continues to be the impressive, easy-to-drive car. Things just absolutely stuck on rails. Bill, all those in-car shots of this vehicle look fantastic. A testament to the hard work and the testing that this team has done. And interesting that I think it was Martin who made the comment before about Ralph's maturity and how well this car is set up in the opening practice session. We're going to go back now with ITV with James and Martin.
Lap 59 of 70 here at Magny-Cours. You're riding with race leader Ralf Schumacher. He's pretty much maintaining the gap of 6.5 seconds over Juan Montoya. And we were just wondering whether, in fact, the Williams team have told him to hold station. The pace now, 1:17.696, the last lap from Ralf Schumacher. And that is about a second slower than he was going earlier in the Grand Prix. Second a lap, that is. So it would indicate that he's not pushing as hard as he was before. Michael Schumacher in third place is pushing very hard indeed, but he's a full half a minute behind his brother. And that really is a staggering amount of time, really, when you consider that Michael Schumacher was winning Grand Prix just a month ago. If it stays like this, as it is at the moment, then Michael Schumacher will lead the World Championship by 64 points to Kimi Raikkonen's 56. Ralf Schumacher will have jumped right up to 53 points. He'll be just 11 behind his brother, and Juan Montoya on 47. You'll have a 4-way scrap for the World Championship going into the final 6 or 7 races. There is Patrick Head, technical director.
What he's saying there is something I've been watching. I mean, he's obviously been told to he can't pass Ralph. So you've got a very disinterested Montoya out there at the moment. Either that or he's got a little gremlin beginning to creep into the system. He's in the 119. What Patrick Head was just saying in his tender way there was it was all right telling him the gap to Ralf Schumacher. You've got to tell him the gap to Michael as well, because Michael's now just 20 seconds behind and closing in at 2 seconds per lap. I'm sure Montoya's just coasting at this stage, but let's hope he doesn't have a problem anyway.
Well, certainly there's no hanging around as far as Michael Schumacher is concerned. He'll be upset at the lack of performance for Ferrari in the last 2 Grand Prix. And certainly, I for one think that Michael Schumacher is driving the best he's done at any stage in his career. Every Grand Prix he's turning up. He's definitely at a car disadvantage at the moment. And his performance yesterday in qualifying was stunning. And today as well, he's managed to jump 2 faster McLarens, get himself third. OK, Coulthard had a problem with refueling, but nevertheless, it's been another stellar drive by Michael Schumacher this afternoon. Well, if it stays like this, looking at the constructors, it will be very interesting indeed. Ferrari on 101 points, they will be, and Williams will be on 100. Silverstone in 2 weeks' time. Juan Montoya, who we're riding with here, said yesterday evening in his press briefing that he thinks that Silverstone might be a bit of a wake-up call for Williams. I think Ferrari will certainly be hoping that's the case. But Patrick Head later on the same afternoon said, well, I don't know why he says that. We think we're going to be pretty strong there. They were fastest at a Silverstone test a couple of weeks ago, but a lot can change in the next week. There's a big test going on in Barcelona at which Ferrari and Bridgestone are going to be throwing the kitchen sink at it. They've got new compounds, new constructions, new shapes of tyres even, we're told, and they're hoping to strike some gold. And well, we'll see if they manage to do that, because Silverstone, they certainly need to stage a bit of a fight back. Let's listen then to this BMW engine down the back straight. peaking out 19,000 RPM. Higher than a soprano singer on full song. A bit wide into the apex there for Montoya. Maybe his concentration isn't 100% here now. He's been told, presumably, to back off.
The tyres and brakes cooled down just a little bit, and where you were braking before doesn't quite cut it anymore. He's 17 seconds ahead of Michael now. I don't think Montoya's got a problem. I think he just was told to cruise and cool it, so he decided he really had lost interest in the fight. Now 10.2 seconds ahead of him. You have to say common sense says you have to do that. You have to tell, you know, if you've got such a commanding lead in the afternoon with both cars out front, why let them race each other ragged and one falls off the road or whatever. But it's a pity for us, but it's common sense for the team.
Do you think it constitutes a team order? It's certainly an order to hold station, and it comes from the team, but it's not team order in the sense of switch the order of the cars, but the wording of the regulations does just say no team orders are allowed which affect the outcome of the Grand Prix. So I think, given that the order is what it is at the moment, you couldn't say it was a team order, but a little bit of a grey area there anyway, I'm sure. There'll be a little bit of talk about that. Nevertheless, it's the smart thing, as you say, with such a margin, such a superiority in the package. Why overstress the cars?
Yes, indeed. Raikkonen is now back up to speed. He had just a bad run there, I think. He's now down to 17.2, whatever it was a bad place in the Grand Prix for him. Allowed Michael to comfortably, as it turned out, leapfrog him by 5-6 car lengths. And that's all about in-laps, all about all your sectors right into the pit lane, hitting the speed limit to the last possible moment, the team doing a great job for you, and then getting up to speed. It's not about the outlap. It wasn't about the outlap at that time. There we go, look, they pull the hose. Where's the lollipop? The lollipop's down. Now that's the changing then of the first one. In it goes. It looks... Yeah, the lollipop was up. They thought that refueling was out, and it was out by and large. Just the very end of it hooked in. Somebody screamed on the radio to DC, stop! And the lollipop came back down again. Off he goes. And luckily, nobody hurt.
A little bit of the bodywork, it looked like, lying on the ground there. Just highlighted there by the race director to show us that they think a bit of Coulthard's car might be missing. At the moment, Coulthard circulating in 5th place, 42 seconds behind the race leader, 5 seconds behind his teammate Raikkonen, who's in 4th place. And Coulthard's pace, certainly nothing wrong with the car. He's in the mid 1:17, same sort of pace as Raikkonen, same sort of pace as Michael Schumacher and Ralf Schumacher as well.
Status quo then through the final stages of this Grand Prix, James, in terms of positions all the way down the field. The closest fight really is Wilson and Verstappen, the two Minardis. Wilson's got himself ahead of Verstappen. That happens quite often in a Grand Prix, doesn't it? And certainly Wilson can very much hold his own in race pace with Jos Verstappen. Furman still bringing up the tail of the field in 16th. Not a great day once again for the Brits. Button running out of gas. Coulthard with a refueling problem, now down in 5th. And then Wilson 14th, Furman 16th. 4 retirees then, the 2 Renaults with engine problems. Fisichella with an engine problem, and Button with a refueling rig problem that left him running out of fuel. And he said they were talking Japanese to him as he came near the pit entry and didn't understand what they meant, so didn't come in.
Verstappen there going very, very slowly. You can see the top left of your screens there. I don't think he was just moving out of the way of his friend Michael Schumacher. I think he's got some sort of problem, Jos Verstappen. His pace, as Martin was just saying, absolutely consistent with that of his teammate on the previous lap, but he has got some sort of difficulty. Wouldn't be at all surprised to see him go into the pits. Well, I think these race directors must have some sort of allergy to Mark Webber. They don't seem to want to show him on a Sunday afternoon, but I'll tell you, he's quietly been getting on with it. He's in 6th place at the moment, 23 seconds behind Coulthard, but comfortably ahead of Barrichello 7th and Panis in 8th. And 3 points today, 3 more points for Jaguar, pushed them up ahead of Jordan in the championship to 6th place. I know they're honing in on 5th. They believe they can finish 5th this year in the World Championship, which, given where they started from last year and what a dog of a car last year's Jaguar was, that's quite good progress.
Webber said to me this morning, he said they might leave us a few scraps on the table, the big boys, and effectively that's exactly what they've done, isn't it? But his pace has been good. He's stayed within 23 seconds of the two McLarens, so not too shabby at all for Mark Webber, who's making quite a name for himself in Grand Prix racing.
Yeah, he benefited, of course, from the demise of the two Renaults that were ahead of him. Otherwise, it would have been 8th and a single point for Mark Webber here this afternoon. Still a few laps to go here. This is we're working on lap 66 of this 70-lap Grand Prix. Michael Schumacher still pushing hard, as he has done throughout the Grand Prix. And he never gives up, does he, Michael Schumacher? Until he sees the checkered flag, there is always a chance of winning a Grand Prix. However bad your car is, however difficult it is to drive, however compromised your tyres are, your setup is, however much of a problem you may have with your engine, it ain't over until it's over. 5 remaining then for Ralf Schumacher, chasing his 2nd victory in succession. And what a boost it would be for everybody at Grove in Oxfordshire, the whole Williams team. This was described by Frank Williams as being the greatest push. Wow, he's gone straight on! Ralf Schumacher lost a little bit of time, but luckily Montoya is so far behind now it won't cost him anything. Possibly a little lapse of concentration now. I was just saying, Frank Williams has described this as the greatest push his team have ever made, technically, to try and get themselves on terms with the front runners. They reckon they found a 1.5 seconds in this car since the beginning of the season in Australia. Ralf Schumacher very nearly throwing it all away there with just 5 remaining, but he's managed to keep it on the island. Yeah,
brain in neutral there, I think, for Ralf. Just went too deep into that new, tighter Chateau d'Eau curve, and cost him a second or something, and he was already 14 and a bit ahead. So that will certainly catch his attention. Some spots of fluid coming on to the camera there, I would imagine, from the back of the Minardi. And let's watch this then. This is Ralf getting too deep on the brakes, getting himself way into the corner. The back end steps out, and he has to counter steer and begins to run wide. Look, more dramatic on board. Here we go on board, and many a time, and a lesser car would have dumped you in the gravel there.
So just to recap on what's happened here this afternoon, Michael Schumacher dropping down to 4th place at the start after a great performance off the line from both Williams cars. Rubens Barrichello dropped down to the back of the field. The first of the 3 stoppers came in on lap 15. Ralf Schumacher 4 laps later, just showing how much more fuel he was carrying than the people he was racing against. He came in on lap 19. But really, it was all about Williams throughout the Grand Prix. In every single one of the 4 stints that they've driven this afternoon, they've been able to pull out a gap and maintain it. And Ralf Schumacher, most importantly, has been able to maintain a gap to Montoya. No real change in the top 8 after the 2nd round of pit stops, but then we had the blow-up of Fernando Alonso and Jarno Trulli's engine problem as well. And then David Coulthard in the pit stops had a big problem refueling. That dropped him down to 5th place. Michael Schumacher able to jump the 2 McLarens in the pit stops, and that really was an amazing bit of driving from Michael Schumacher either side of those stops to get himself up to a podium position. McLaren's unable to respond after that, and although Michael Schumacher has been closing in on the back of Montoya, who is in 2nd place, he's not been able to do anything about it.
Raikkonen just did a 1:16.7 and then followed it with a 1:20.7. It seems like he may have made a mistake somewhere. So World Championship contender Kimi Raikkonen now just 2.4 ahead of teammate Coulthard. What went on there? Hopefully we'll get a replay if he did run off the racetrack, but lost a full 4 seconds somewhere. He's lost another 3/10 in the first sector to Coulthard. Has Raikkonen got a developing problem in the final throes of the French Grand Prix?
Well, from a championship point of view, let's hope not, because he came here 7 points behind Michael Schumacher. Things stay as they are, he'll go away 8 points behind him, but it's certainly all to play for here, particularly with Ralf Schumacher coming on strong in the Drivers' World Championship. Awful lot still to play for.
Raikkonen's mid-sector good, so clearly just made a mistake somewhere. Ted?
But Martin, I think Kimi Raikkonen is certainly nursing a problem. I've been round to the back. There are no long faces on the telemetry screens. Nothing panicky on the pit wall. Maybe his tyres are imbalanced. Every time he goes past me on the pit straight, he sounds fine, but definitely a problem. His lap times are all over the place in the closing stages of this race.
Yes, he's just done an 18.4 that time around, so both McLaren slow in the final sector, and Ralf Schumacher the leader then.
That was Jos Verstappen we saw there just in the pits a moment ago. We saw him touring very slowly before, so whatever the cause, he's made 5 pit stops this afternoon, so clearly 2 of them have been recently with whatever problem he's got.
left front wheel was a problem we're hearing from Louise down in the pit lane. So they've managed to fix that for Verstappen. That's why he was doing a very slow sector and lap times. Schumacher then, Ralph, coming to the end of yet another lap.
And beginning his final lap, the mechanics poised. It's a superstition not to go too quickly up onto the pit wall. Let's see what it feels like then to drive the final lap of a Grand Prix knowing that you're going to win it. Down the back straight, still going quick enough. Big crowd here today, much bigger than expected. All the grandstands seem to be full. Final time then into the Adelaide hairpin for Ralf Schumacher.
No traffic ahead of him. Look, a ribbon of tarmac just beckoning him to his second consecutive Grand Prix victory. Really has been a great drive from him. And in the crucial final and third pit stop, he was able to just stay ahead of teammate Montoya, who was clearly then told, OK, game over. You've got to follow your teammate Herb. Montoya lost interest at that point. Is now 12.7 seconds behind Ralph, 7.3 ahead of Michael Schumacher. But Ralf Schumacher peerlessly then now just got to coast downhill to the end of this lap and win the Grand Prix.
Yep, it's literally all downhill from here. A new section of racetrack, the big grandstands on the outside. Everyone's clapping, the air horns are blowing. Final chicane for him, and Ralf Schumacher wins his second Grand Prix in a row. He wins the French Grand Prix at Magny-Cours. Big thumbs up from him to everybody in the BMW Williams team. 12 months ago, his brother clinched his 5th world title here, but today it's all about Ralf Schumacher. An absolutely peerless drive. He fought off the attentions of his teammate Juan Montoya and put himself in a position where he could not be beaten. And he really is a serious contender for the World Championship now. There's his wife, Cora, just kissing some of the mechanics. There's Michael Schumacher. What a gain he made today. It looked like it was going to be 5th place for him, but he was able to pass both the McLarens. And that will leave the McLaren Mercedes team very long-faced indeed. So, I have to ask you, who's your driver of the day? I mean, obviously, Michael made up places. Ralf Schumacher didn't miss a beat. Who's it going to be?
Well, it's between one of the two Schumies, isn't it? It's got to be Ralf. Made the perfect start. Dominated the Grand Prix in many respects. Had an answer for Montoya when he needed it. I think he had the car on the speed. I don't see where Montoya really would have had a chance to pass him. He'd have been too much in turbulent air in turn 3. Ralf had it under control. For me, driver of the day.
Williams back-to-back 1-2 finishes. The first time that's happened for that team since Hill and Villeneuve did it in much the same way as Ralf and Juan did it. The Hill-Villeneuve double was back in 1996. Ralf certainly the driver of the day, but what do you say about Schumacher? What a champion. He managed to somehow extricate himself from a situation where the McLarens had leapt in front of him. Hard work to get Coulthard back out on to the circuit in front of Michael after that first pit stop, but then by the time, I beg your pardon, the second pit stop, by the time they got to the third, Michael had managed to get back out in front of not only Coulthard but Kimi Raikkonen, and that could be a crucial move for the championship, Neil. It's cost Raikkonen at least a point.
Well, it's classic Michael, a tremendous in-lap, a tremendous out-lap, great work in the pits from Ferrari to keep Michael on the podium. Very unlucky for David Coulthard to sustain that problem with the standby fuel rig, and here is the official race classification after 70 laps. Ralf, Michelin, Montoya, Michelin, so Williams, BMW, 1-2 again. Michael Schumacher for Bridgestone and Ferrari in third. Tremendous performance again from Mark Webber, 6th position, equaling that performance of last weekend. Looking further down the order, Cristiano Di Matta, another day of hard work and no great yield for it, in 11th place. And look at all those Bs there. A lot of the Bridgestone runners, unfortunately, struggling at the back of the pack. It'll be curious to see what they can come up with at this test in Spain next week at the Barcelona circuit.
16 finishes, once again testimony to the reliability of these cars under the new rules, given that they're in Parc Fermé. James did make a comment about that midway through the race, but even though just after James said that, there was a flurry of activity. 3 of those 4 guys were out and within the space of 1 or 2 laps, but nevertheless 16 out of 20 is very good. Webber, just emphasising that point you made, Neil, he's now been in the points in 5 of the last 6 races. He's 9th in the championship, and that is an incredible situation given the number of DNFs that have been thrust upon him by an unreliable car early in the season. We'll come back after this to the podium, we hope. what a turnaround for Williams. They've now scored 65 out of a possible 72 points in the last 4 rounds. In those same 4 rounds, Ferrari 39 points, McLaren 22. But most important, of course, Michael, big save as we look at the Constructors' Championship there. In terms of the Drivers' Championship, he's in good shape. But in that championship, Williams, well, I mentioned the points. They are within 3.
Doesn't that look tasty now, seeing Williams BMW right up in amongst it with Ferrari. So 103 plays 100. In the Drivers' Championship, the margin pretty tight still. Michael's got 64, Kimi with 56, Ralph now with 53, Montoya with 47. Alonso not scoring today, still with 39. Rubens also with 39. And what about Ralph? This unbroken point-scoring record throughout 2003, and he quite justifiably is beside himself with enthusiasm.
What if, you have to ask, and we're only midway through the season really, what if Ralph became a close title contender? Now, there was comment there by Martin about Montoya being in a better state of mind to attack Michael during a race. He thought Ralph wasn't as equipped mentally to attack Michael during a race. What if they were challenging for the championship? What if Ralph was just a couple of points behind Michael towards the end of the season? That would be a rare and very interesting prospect.
Well, at the moment it's a question of Ferrari and Bridgestone getting close enough. And the way these cars are going at the moment, and those tyres before me, I don't know that we need to worry about that in the short term.
Well, there's a test ban on, but Jean Todt did say that there is still work that can be done off the track.
Didn't these cars look impressive tonight, Bill? I mean, you look at these pictures, those onboard shots of both these cars. What about that stuff when they went through the last cycle of pit stops? Montoya and Schumacher coming out so close, and they were driving the wheels off the things, and there were those beautiful shots of Ralph just sliding the thing in on the rear brake in the last corner. It was fantastic to watch.
It's a pretty high downforce circuit, this too, isn't it?
Yeah, maximum downforce circuit. Look at the wing angles there at the front wing assembly and the rear wing size of the bucket shape there at the back of it. A lot of aggressive rear wing on the car. And Michael's drive, you could see the body language in the car was fantastic in the Ferrari as well. The boys are now up on the podium.
Well, he pulled away from Raikkonen in the closing laps. That may have been unexpected in the Michelin camp. Well, we have a championship that is very much alive, even though Michael has managed to just sneak away a little bit from Kimi. He's strengthened his position, but the trend is definitely against Ferrari, and perhaps more importantly, against Bridgestone for now. But if Michelin can make great gains in the space of a few rounds, then certainly so can their rivals. But it comes back to that comment we made at the start of the season, Neil, and it bears reminding ourselves from time to time that Michelin does have Williams and McLaren, two on-the-pace teams developing those tyres, whereas Bridgestone is totally focused on not just one team, but arguably in some cases one man.
Well, that's right, and a lot of people have made that point in the recent past that Michael, in fact, and Ferrari may well be victims of their own monopolisation of the tyre backer. But remember that Bridgestone have had incredible strength in global motorsport for a long period of time, and I mentioned on RPM earlier in the day that they well and truly saw off Goodyear in Champ Car racing and then subsequently in Formula One, and I'm sure they'll work hard. Big changes afoot for some of their tyre construction and compounds, and I suspect that we'll still see a full-scale brawl in the races ahead.
It'll be interesting to hear the comments from the drivers. Key laps, definitely lap 50 when Ralph came out just in front of Juan, whose tyres were warm, but Ralph managed to hold position at that moment and then, of course, drive away from him in the closing laps. And lap 52, of course, was when Michael, after a 7.4-second stop, came out just in front. Well, there was question about whether he'd come out in front of Coulthard, but Coulthard's unfortunate mishap in the pits certainly made sure Michael had come out in front of him. But when he came out in front of Kimi, I think that was a little bit surprising to a lot of people. Still a lot of pride there between the brothers. Michael proud of Ralph's achievements.
Well, it's a great performance, isn't it? And a great moment for the two brothers again.
Just don't challenge me for the championship, bro.
Fantastic stuff. Well, a great day for Williams, a 1 and a 2 for them. A 4 and a 5 for McLaren. Not a bad day for Ferrari, but not a brilliant day either. And as for the rest of them, bit of an interesting one for Renault. No points, so and amazing that they both had engine problems within a couple of laps of each other. And the disaster continues at BAR. You know, they had another car go out, and it looked as though from the body language of Jenson Button's car that it actually ran out of fuel, and there was discussion that there could have been a rig problem there. It's funny, Bill, we still see these occasional rig problems. You know, they talk about how well made they are and how accurate they are, but it doesn't seem to take much for there to be a problem with them, and then it causes potentially catastrophe in the pits. We got away with it tonight, but only just, it seems.
Yeah, no fuel going in one car. That was grossly disappointing. That was our first casualty, in fact. Jenson Button, well, you can forget about that one. Let's look ahead to Silverstone, particularly for him. That's a big round for him.
Well, I mean, the whole weekend for those guys to turn up at work and find that the cars are locked up in the transporter, that's a bit of an ugly scene. And then the whole legal kerfuffle and, you know, very limited running. You can't afford to give a quality field like this the opportunity to go and log miles while you're watching your cars locked up in the transporter. And then they lost an engine with Jenson's car on Saturday, and it kind of went downhill from there. Villeneuve put up a big fight, though. There were some great shots of his car at one point during that race. It was a very twitchy car again, though, just as though it was last weekend at the Nürburgring. It's a car that just does not appear to be particularly well balanced, and it looks like a real handful to drive that thing.
It's amazing, with the millions of dollars they throw at Formula One, there are strange little things that still upset the apple cart in races. As you said, the fuel problem, the court case with BAR. I mean, if you put that in a Stallone movie, we'd probably all laugh at it and say, what a joke.
What about the little figure that got dropped in along the way as well about the staff levels for Renault? Oh, 1,500 people there this weekend to have a look and see how their car was performing. They run two cars, by the way, folks. 1,500 people. That's a reasonable sized budget, isn't it?
750 people per car. We'll come back, leaving you with that thought after the break.
Just a count.
It's the type of championship we'd hoped for, a variety of results. Curiously, Ralph Schumacher had to wait 15 months between wins up till Nürburgring, and then, of course, he only had to wait 1 week for the next one. It's funny how it goes, isn't it? When you're hot.
Never rains, it pours.
Williams has a pretty good record at this circuit too. They've now won 5 out of 13 races at Magny-Cours. Of course, there have been many French Grand Prix at other tracks, but generally speaking, could have been 6 out of 13, because last year, of course, one had pole, and both drivers somehow fell off the podium, and it was all Michael followed by the two McLarens. That's motorsport.
It is, and Montoya also picked up the fastest lap tonight, which is his first fastest lap. Spit that out for the 2003 season.
Pretty late for that.
It is.
But a pretty solid drive from Mark Webber once again, and as was pointed out, he did pick up the table scraps, but that's the best you can do, and it shows that the R4 does have some reliability now, and Mark is doing the very best he can with that car.
Terrific job once again. You know, it's exactly the sort of stuff that he's been talking about, that the team's been hoping for, that the car runs reliably. They decided they weren't going to design a space shuttle. They just wanted a good, solid medium to upper level Formula One car, and it's working precisely to plan. Once they've got reliability and they know they're reasonably solid, they can advance from there, which is what they're working on doing. And really, they're the next best, aren't they? After the really big shows with the huge money and the big outfits, these guys are regularly showing that they're the next in the queue.
I was going to say, given the problems they had early in the year, it was rather ironic that the poor Renaults seized, and that's in fact what gave Mark a couple of extra points and a couple of extra positions. Let's hear from the drivers on the podium.
From the Mobil 1 French Grand Prix, congratulations to our first three finishers. In third place to Scuderia Ferrari Marlboro's Michael Schumacher, and scoring their second 1-2 in a row for BMW Williams. In second place, Juan Pablo Montoya and Ralf Schumacher. Ralf, congratulations, great win, led from start to finish. Looked fantastic. Very close with Juan Pablo there in the final stages of the race.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was able to disappear in the first two, but in the first and then after the first pit stop, basically. But then on the second one, I don't know, maybe we got the pressures wrong. I have to check that later. Car didn't feel very good, had some problems with this set. So one came closer. For that, I had overtaking maneuvers, lapping guys, and Trulli, who slowed down, and I just couldn't overtake him because I was yellow. So I saw him going in and called the team to make the place for me after, because I knew that if I had stayed out a lot longer, he would have catched me, and I would have looked pretty strange. So I didn't want that to happen.
But an awe-inspiring performance today. How long do you think this can go on now for BMW Williams?
Well, it's always a question of Formula One. I think if the two of us, including the team, keeps working like that, we can keep it going. But there will be circuits where for sure it's going to be tough again. But certainly we are going in the right direction. We have a long test next week. Hopefully go through a lot of stuff there, find some stuff for the next few races, and continue doing this.
Juan Pablo, very good second place. Quite a long first stop, it looked like, but then you got very, very close to Ralf at the end.
Yeah, my first stint wasn't very good. I wasn't very comfortable driving the car. I couldn't really push it. I was losing quite a lot of time, especially in the last sector. Then, towards the end of the stint got a bit better, and I came into the pits. I think they had a problem with a wheel nut or something, and I came into the pits about 3 seconds behind Ralf and came out like 7 or 8 seconds, and I paced myself and started pushing. So I could run the same pace as him, so I started pushing out very hard. Before the last stop, I was right there with him. I decided to come in 2 laps earlier, and Ralf decided to come in the lap after. So all the advantage that I made, it wasn't, needed probably one more second. That's all I needed, but it wasn't there. So after that, I just backed off.
You did set fastest lap, and you seemed to gain quite a lot of time when the oil was down and in traffic.
Yeah, the car was very good, and I was pretty aggressive with the traffic to be able to go by quicker, and it seemed to work quite well. But, I think it's great for the team. I don't know how many points we're behind Ferrari, but they're not that many now.
Well, you're 3 points behind Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship now. Michael, you were hoping that on that side of the grid you could make a good start, but in fact Kimi Raikkonen got in front of you going into Turn 1. Can you just talk us through that?
Yeah, pretty easy. He out-accelerated me and was in front of me, and even had to fight against Coulthard, who came very close to me. We went side by side through Turn 1 and 3, which was quite exciting.
But you made up for that late in the race, ran 5 laps longer than Kimi for that third stop, and came out ahead of him to get the podium finish.
Yeah, that was the only opportunity, knowing that they had stopped very early, all the first 2 stops. It meant that the last stop they did was with a lot of fuel. We knew they didn't have new tyres, so we hoped that our tyres would hold together and I could do the pace I did, and that brought us the advantage towards them.
Quick summary of your race today. Do you think that was as good as you could have expected here this weekend?
Well, you always hope for a better, but looking at the weekend's pace overall, that was about what we thought we would do.
Clinical performance, that is in the interview, once again, from Michael Schumacher. He doesn't. He is, isn't he? Fantastic.
Actually, just one interesting thing, looking at those pictures of the guys, you notice how clean their race suits are? that is not the normal situation in open wheelie when you finish a race like that, normally covered in dirt and dust and rubber and champagne if you've been on the podium. They slip those upper body jackets on that look like race suits, and you notice they've borrowed your 1980s shoulder pads in there too, Billy.
I'm still wearing
You've
those,
left them laying around so that they can show off their sponsors a bit. I'm sure I'd throw a slagging in there at this time of night.
Why not? Interesting dynamic between Montoya and Ralf now, because early in the season Ralf was under all that pressure. We've brought this up before, but I think now that Juan has finished behind him a couple of times, it becomes, well, they're a formidable lineup. They seem to be getting on quite well at the moment, although you never really know, do you? But that is an interestingly balanced team compared to, say, Michael and Rubens, where Rubens has really fallen off the stool.
Well, if you go back and look at the history of Williams Grand Prix engineering as it was once known, and the Williams team generally in the last couple of decades, they've always ended up one way or another with a couple of hard charges, and both James and Martin made mention during the commentary that this is not a team noted for its driver intervention. Their races, Frank Williams, the team owner, and technical director Patrick Head, are noted hard men. They are into people that race. They're not into to having a 1 and a 2 scenario, unless of course you get down to the business end of the championship where you really need to determine one way or another that you want to reduce the threat, if you like, of bringing both cars home. But Martin was suggesting in the commentary there that they shut Juan Pablo down in the latter part of the race, and that may well be the case. You'd need to be listening to the radios, but certainly you know, they're in a class of their own at the moment, and those two guys are ultra competitive. Again, I stress that stuff that we saw, you know, with about 15-20 laps to go. It was fantastic motor racing between those two, and actually we saw something that was very interesting as well in the pit lane, and it was the way in which the drivers reprogram the steering wheels as they're actually exiting the pit lane. As you know, and we mentioned this in Melbourne, they've actually got a multi-function programmable steering wheel in these cars. And for example, Billy, you never know with this stuff because the teams won't tell you, but look at this stuff going on here with Ralph reprogramming. So what's going on there is he may be changing the display that he sees within the steering wheel. You know, on a V8 supercar it can actually be on the dashboard, although on Scafie's car at one point it was actually up in the wheel. But one guy said to me in Melbourne when I asked the question, you know, exactly how do you configure this and what's it all about? He said, well, it's a very interesting situation. The button that you push out on the racetrack for a drink may well be the button that you push in the pit lane to activate the speed limiter. So it's multi-function and the drivers play with them, and very easy to get lost. And despite the stuff that you read in magazines here and there, some of the, I'm trying to think of the politically correct term here, some of the mistakes that are made, you know what I'm trying to say, are often made by drivers screwing up the programming on the wheel.
Okay, well, we're going to have a look at David Coulthard's moment here. There were several, but this was very, very unfortunate.
Yeah, they weren't getting the fuel in with the initial refuelling rig, and then they put that standby rig on, and then there was real confusion here. And notice also that one of the winglets has actually come off the left-hand side of the left-hand side pod, and it was just picked up. There's another couple of angles of this. This was potentially extremely dangerous. This is the thing you really worry about. The nozzle actually was disconnected, but someone screamed out on the radio for DC to stop, which he's done. But then there's all that confusion, people tripping over each other, and you know, you just hate seeing that sort of thing. And obviously fire is the great risk. But if one of those cars actually runs over anybody with the rear tyre spinning or what have you, it's a particularly dangerous scenario. The thing that I was really surprised about when we had a good close look at some of the gear in Melbourne, and I've mentioned this before in some of the telecasts, is just how clumsy and heavy that whole apparatus is. Even when you try and actually manhandle the thing when it's empty, it's not an easy thing to actually hang on to. When it's got fuel in the nozzle, I think the total weight of the whole apparatus that the refueler's got hold of is something in the order of about 35 kilograms, and it's just clumsy. And Martin you know, doesn't often make sort of aggressive political comment, but you could tell by his remarks that there's a little bit of angst in the paddock at the moment about just how clumsy those things are.
Well, for someone like him to be frustrated with a situation like that, well, then you know there is certainly something to it. Let's look ahead on your home of motorsport as we close out this round of the Formula One World Championship. RPM will be back next week at the usual time slot with a full review of this race, and it will be Sunday, July 13. MotoGP returns from Donington, so a bit of parallel there between the two championships because F1's off to Silverstone the following week. Champ Car Series, well, Cleveland, and that is a lot sooner than the two previous programs I've talked about. It's tomorrow night, Monday, July 7. In fact, that would be tonight, wouldn't it? OK, let's get that sorted. Formula One, Round 11, Silverstone, and that is Sunday, July 20. So there is plenty more to come. Neil Crompton, thank you very much for your comments tonight.
Thank you very much. Very much enjoyed the race. Another great pressure race, and really looking forward to the British Grand Prix in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. It's a ripper of a championship. Everything we'd hoped for at the start of the season. We hope you're enjoying it as well. Bye for now.
Schumacher gone down to 5th place. He's battling hard
it. That's put Coulthard back into 5th place.
And Ralf Schumacher wins his 2nd Grand Prix in a row. He wins the French Grand Prix at Magny-Cours. Big thumbs up from him to everybody in the BMW Williams team.
This programme proudly brought to you by Vodafone, proud sponsors of the Scuderia Ferrari Formula One team. Michelin, discover a new driving experience. Shannon's, special insurance for special vehicles. And Panasonic, ideas for life.